Home is a feeling.
My home is my castle.
Everyone needs a place to feel safe. Everybody needs a home.
Our home, our jobs, we lose everything.
Housing that can be safe and available to everyone, we need it right now.
Cities today are facing many different kinds of challenges.
Immigration, climate change, urbanization.
Housing affordability.
For når man er så ung, så er det nesten umulig å spare så masse.
It is important to know who your neighbor is.
We need each other, and we need to connect.
Bolig- og næringsbygg har en stor andel av forbruket på energi.
Står jo foran store globale utfordringer og muligheter.
Det er jo en økonomisk gevinst I hvert fall å kjøpe I et borettslag, for du har liksom en sikkerhet.
Menschen mit niedrigen Einkommen oder eben auch Studenten die Möglichkeit haben, hier eine Wohnung anzumieten.
Architecture has this potential of also giving a better life.
Ich dachte mir, dass ich dann dort ja Nachhaltiges schaffen kann.
Nå ble fokus også mye mer på bygningsmaterialer og hvordan man bruker dem.
It's a circular system.
We need to design homes with the residents who live in them.
To build a community is the essence of it.
When you have lived a place like this, you cannot go back.
We love it here.
It's a very good feeling of coming home.
I feel I find the safe place for me and my family. This village and this house is my home.
Bom dia a todos e todas, bem-vindos à Conferência Internacional
and welcome to our international conference on dynamics and challenges of housing, organized by 𝐂𝐴TZ𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜 in partnership with Gebalis, City Council of Lisbon and the City Council of Matosinhos, alongside Housing Europe and the Construction Institute of the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto. The present and the future of housing in a forum that aims to cross local, national and international public policy, fostering the integration of the main strategies of the sector. A challenging present invaded by successive question marks where housing has been placed before constant stimuli in the last few years that have intensified with the constraints coming from the global crisis that we are facing. A future that can be seen as a great opportunity to change the paradigm. Let's now begin with 𝐃𝐲𝐬. He is an executive board member of 𝐂𝐴TZ𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜. 𝐃𝐲𝐬, you have the floor. Good morning and welcome to Matosinhos, land of the horizon, of sea, best fish in the world. This conference follows up the position of the municipality of Matosinhos taken within the framework of housing policies, with the public debate being a decisive factor in improving the quality of life of people. I do confess it has been a privilege to actively participate in building new housing policies, trying to make a positive difference in the life of people. This is only possible thanks to the work developed by the 70 employees of the company and our partners. In this opening intervention, let me take this opportunity to introduce 𝐂𝐴TZ𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜, sharing some of the practices and measures that we have been implementing for a better understanding of the housing reality in Matosinhos. 𝐂𝐴TZ𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜, throughout this time in office, has taken a leadership role in debating public policies for housing, bringing to debate the main challenges of the sector. I would like to highlight the seminar on housing and human rights, the conference on right to housing, and the webinar about challenges of housing post-pandemic and challenges to solutions, and the affordable renting. In terms of housing answers able to fulfill the mission of providing decent housing for all people from Matosinhos. This comes to strengthen the values that define our acting, set in transparency, management and proximity. We want a municipality where no one gets left behind. Everyone has a right to dignity and the comfort of their home. The current pandemic situation came to bring the challenge of finding solutions for problems we never seen before. But with this reality, we have a lesson. Our resilience is ruthless, and we can adapt to the most difficult concept of our life, careful with what the future brings and the growing needs of housing at fair prices, at the ability to pay coming from families that we have been working on, and now strengthening our intentions. We do not stop and continue to embody the local strategy of housing of Matosinhos as a decisive tool for the future of the municipality. We estimate a total investment of 80 million euros, including the cost by the municipality and the private owners. It is acknowledged that the municipality of Matosinhos is fulfilling an investment that's unique in housing. We are in the forefront by betting in the ambitious plan of rehabilitation of the public housing with more and better housing, and a total investment in the last 3 years of 16 million euros. You are in the forefront launching the municipal program Matosinhos Casa Acessível, affordable house, with a new paradigm for the population, especially for youngsters and the middle class, by affordable renting. We are also in the forefront mitigating the impact of situations of greater social vulnerability, namely by owners, starting with a national program. We are still in the forefront with a broad movement coming from local institutions for the national program Healthy Neighborhoods, with a funding that will allow to fulfill 16 local projects. And also the Banco de Bens, which is a new initiative with the principles of sustainability and to support the families of Matosinhos. We are therefore being a part and associating with national and European platforms in social responsibility, the green adaptation for a fairer society, so that everyone is proud of living in Matosinhos. 𝐂𝐴TM will continue to contribute to an innovative, inclusive, guided towards its citizens, city of Matosinhos to be a benchmark municipality. But as I said, we won't do it alone. Partnerships, networks, these are words that are not incidental. They are present in this presentation of mine. Satisfying the needs of the people will be as great as is the different connection between different agents, public and private. Alone, we cannot solve this issue that becomes national. It's not hard to see that the housing policy will have an influence in policies of the future, so new opportunities, especially the RRP, the Resilience and Recovery Plan, are a reason to be optimistic in terms of the municipality of Matosinhos. This source of funding will pave the way so that we can bring the policies that we desire. There is a properly defined path guided towards the next challenges with more optimism. That path is not easy, but everything we've done so far made it possible to put down the bedrock for the sustainability of the municipality. I do hope that this is a fruitful journey. Good work, and see you soon. Thank you, 𝐃𝐲𝐬. Let's now welcome Maria Helena Correia. She's an executive board member of Gebalis. Good morning. On behalf of Gebalis and the organizing committee of this Congress, let me welcome you, especially to our speakers, for having accepted this challenge, sharing knowledges and experiences. Housing today, more than ever, takes on a relevant role in the national and international panorama. The reports of the Housing Observatory tell us that we are experiencing a housing crisis since 2015 with an impact on the life of people, increasing the risk of poverty and social exclusion. 10.2 of family households spent more than 40% in housing costs, but this percentage increases to 37.8 when we consider those who are in risk of poverty. It is undeniable the need of social support in terms of housing, but also the adoption of a wholesome approach able to answer the existing problems, some of them structural, who are the basis of these situations. The increase of values for buying and renting houses, the scarcity of public housing compared to demand, leaves families in a fragile situation, destining most of their financial resources to housing. Also, migratory flows that were disseminated Sunday, the World Day of the Refugee, brings a notion that are many refugees coming out of their countries because of politics, because of climate change, and this brings a problem to housing. Even the pandemic crisis and its financial impacts have contributed, so the surcharge in the sector of housing makes sense that all stakeholders to find new mitigating strategies, facing this as an opportunity to innovate some of the new concepts of sustainability and technological innovation. It is remarkable the clear need to leverage the access to public housing for new audiences, different audiences with different characteristics and different needs. The new models, more than innovative, need to be aggregative, integrative. So it's necessary upstream to deepen the dialogue between constructor and behavioral languages. This interdisciplinarity will allow to create new models of housing that portray the mode of lives of people, multifunctional housing models set in the concepts of mobility, accessibility, universal use houses for people regardless of their physical and mental characteristics. Because we have many challenges that will worsen in the future. Creating new concepts, increasing the ability to answer to needs means to create a city that's sustainable, where houses do not contribute to the increase of emissions. Buildings are the greatest items of consumption in Europe, but also for its reduction, paving the way for a system of clean energy and carbon neutral. Buildings are responsible for half the energy consumption in the city, and also responsible for about half the greenhouse gas that goes into the atmosphere, allocated to local consumptions of energy. So we need to empower energy efficiency of the buildings, to improve the patterns of comfort and energy efficiency in housing, to face climate change, not just pave the sustainable way of mitigating the greenhouse gas, but also it will contribute to flatten the curve of climate change. So we need to refocus, regroup national authorities, European authorities, in terms of the renovation wave by renewing buildings, bringing efficiency to a sector that, alongside, will have a crucial role in the recovery in Europe in this period post-pandemic. Let me also highlight within this context that we need to rethink housing as a structuring element of human activity, namely interconnecting the issues of mobility in the cities and the commute, house, work, benefiting from public transport that are alternative and free of emissions. We are living times of change. We must see them as a unique opportunity to build inclusive cities, contributing to mitigate social inequalities and promoting the access to housing as a resource to a social elevator. Let me finish by highlighting how important events such as this are, because we have speakers coming from different areas of business connected to housing, and a word of appreciation to all the entities involved in the organization, especially Housing Europe, for the relevance it has in the European set. Thank you. These issues of housing and the connection with sustainability. And to finish, this first panel, we have the distinguished presence of Sorcha Edwards, Secretary General of Housing Europe, to close this welcoming session.
Hello, thank you very much for the welcome. So on behalf of Housing Europe, the team in Brussels, but also the members throughout Europe, I would like to thank you for involving us in this organization. It's really been a pleasure to work alongside the other promoters of this event, so the municipality of Lisbon, the municipality of Matosinhos, Gebalis, Matosinhos Habitat, the Construction Institute, FEUP. So we're very happy the day has actually arrived. And very importantly, I'd like to also again welcome Matosinhos Habitat to the Housing Europe family. This was just approved by the entire membership last week at our General Assembly. So we're really looking forward to accelerate our work together and to increase the representation of Portugal within Housing Europe. So I think all of you are familiar with the organization. We've been representing the public, social and cooperative housing providers for over 30 years in Brussels. So working together with European institutions for better regulation, better finance and better information around housing. At the moment, the organization brings together approximately 46,000 local entities such as Matosinhos Habitat, and together they are managing approximately 26 million homes. It's as pointed out in this program, we're really at a crucial moment in housing policy, really what can be described as a watershed moment. The pandemic has put an even stronger light on all of the inequalities which are really coming from inadequacies in our housing system. So I think the pressure on our sector really requires unity and a common voice at all levels. I think along with this challenge and with this moral imperative to deliver affordable and social housing to those who need it, comes with it a moral imperative to continue to improve our work and to continue to innovate. And this is why I really welcome the focus today that Matosinhos Habitat and Gebalis have put on the need to innovate. And when I say innovate, it's really the social innovation to meet the changing needs of residents and the technical innovation. And these go hand in hand. I think we can be very proud to work for a sector that, when it comes to technical innovation, particularly in the arena of adapting to climate change, we have seen considerable progress. So we've seen the CO2 emissions in the social, public and cooperative housing sector. They have dropped by over 40% in the last 10 years. But however, we estimate that we need to continue to push on this and to continue to have the appropriate finance. We estimate that we would need to reach to a renovation of the entire stock by 2050. We would be needing an additional 10 million euro per year to reach that goal. And what is even more demanding is that this goal to adapt to climate change comes hand in hand with the goal to deliver adequate and supply of social housing for those in need. And there we see that the pressure is also growing, with the latest Eurobarometer survey showing that in addition to those 26 million homes we are providing, in many member states, the number of people on the waiting list is equivalent to the number of the people already living in social housing. So there is a need to at least double the current delivery rate. We are seeing that in many areas we have to bear this double burden indeed of improving the existing stock, adapting the existing stock to need, but at the same time delivering new houses for those who need. And we estimate that 10 million people at the moment in Europe actually are in fear of losing their home for economic reasons, also as a result of the pandemic. So I think there is really a double challenge on the sector. There's no room for relaxation. There's a moral imperative to continue to push the frontiers when it comes to the quality of our work. And I think there is no better way to do that but by accelerating the exchange and coming closer together as a sector. So this is why, again, we very much welcome the stronger representation of Portugal within Housing Europe so we can face these challenges together. Thank you very much and looking forward to a great day ahead.
O nosso muito obrigado pela presença de 𝐃𝐲𝐬 Edwards.
Thank you, 𝐃𝐲𝐬 Edwards, for being with us.
Pelo enquadramento. De seguida, iniciaremos o tema.
Now we will begin the challenge of collaborative work, healthy neighborhoods. We are all aware that the greatest success are reached with a collective action, and to work together, we need to have common ground. Increasingly, public policies try to meet integrated, collaborative actions set on the basic principles of citizenship. But in reality, the time of people and the time of institutions are still too far apart. Does it have to be like this? Do citizens need to fit their needs in times, practices, and language of public administration that will hardly mirror the complex and specific reality of territories? Or can public power challenge communities to identify the problems that they intend to solve, the actions that they commit to fulfill, and the means that they did to do so? From the experience, Healthy Neighborhoods, we will try to explain how citizenship can leverage processes of change, helping public administration to innovate the way that it understands problems, acts in territories, and relates to people who live there. Let me now invite Aitor Varea Oro, architect and member of the team of the National Coordination of the program Healthy Neighborhoods, to join us. Aitor Varea Oro. Good morning, thank you for having me. Let me share my screen so that I can try and explain what is this thing of healthy neighborhoods. I don't know if you can see my screen. Yesterday, when I was preparing this presentation, I thought about the main message that I would like to convey. And I came to the conclusion that the main message would be that we need to put life in the core. Let me tell you why. When I started to work professionally was what you are seeing. I'm an architect, and the first thing was to be involved in the struggle of the citizens who wanted to stop an avenue going through their neighborhood. 1,600 houses would be demolished, but not everyone had the same voice. Not everyone was being heard. And I was lucky enough because someone gave me the opportunity to open the doors of their houses, to not just see the city as someone who's on a plane, but to see the city by the eyes of those who usually are not taken into account. In this case, it was the Roma community. They were about to lose their home, and they lost their right to citizenship already. They lived in houses with no electricity, with no water connection. And this was a responsibility of the public power to solve this problem. And it had to do with an access to technicians that the Roma community could not pay because they would live below the threshold of poverty. I was here. I had hair at that time because I was quite young. And the first thing we did was try to understand how we could see the world through their eyes. What they see would not be what we would see. They lived in different houses. We saw a distance between them and us, and what they would see would be the common ground between the Roma community and the other citizens, I learned one thing. We need to talk to those who have no voice, and that things might have more than one meaning. For us, a fragile situation meant living badly, but for them, when they were invited to participate, the teachers at schools would ask their children, what does it mean, this precarity? And this means that children could stop going to school. This had to do with the life of people, this precariousness. This was a very important experience. I stopped doing what architects do, and I started doing what we know to get to different type of goals and people. It was the first time that I was moved into a reality that not everyone gets the basics. Not everyone has a house that can be called a home. This became clear when COVID came. We were asked to stay at home, but many people could not stay at home. A lot of people who were exposed to the virus, people who would make the city work, the so-called essential workers. They lived far from cities. They had the right to transportation, but we did depend on them. But their vulnerability had material reasons, had to do with mobility, had to do with jobs, with teleworking, of stop working, of contracts that are not legal, that are non-existent. This happened a lot with the support from the Housing Institute, people who could not prove that they had drops in their income because it was so little and so fragile. They didn't have contracts even. They didn't have an evidence, a proof that they had a rented house. Well, all these elements of fragility can be avoided. So we came to the conclusion that we tend to look with easiness at people who have little, but not to the contradictions of public power. And the public power must be accountable because they do have the means to avoid this fragility. Whenever there's a public program, there are certain rules, restricted rules, that we had in a clear, objective manner, and there is one thing which is the mean of proof, and not everyone has this means of proof. So the challenge was not asking the people or that people would innovate, it was the public power. The public power should innovate. So we acted upon one thing that I have been learning, which is, first, we must define why, then for whom, and then the network of actors, of stakeholders, of institutions, to be thorough. But thorough doesn't mean strict. That's just with rigor mortis. Thorough might be flexible. And we did have the challenge of creating a public policy that could encompass all territories. And starting from there, starting from when the moment that the program was approved, we created structures, channels of communication with the population, and we tried to be thorough, but flexible. We created something which was the managing entity. Then we've defined 5 regions. It had to do with the health administrations. We went to each of the intermunicipality communities, and we got to municipalities. And from the social action, we got to each of the entities who were on the field, and also for the 2,882 parishes of the country. We had to work with elements in the field. Each regional team, there were 5, with elements of the Employment Center, of the IEFP, Social Security, of the DG Agriculture and Fisheries, Health Department, And we had to do a lot of things, regulations that allowed us to meet the specific and complex reality of the country. We need to be as thorough that no one would be left behind, that people were allowed to identify themselves with the program, that they didn't have to do everything in their mother to fit in a program that were not available, as long as they would contribute to mitigate inequalities, they would make it more fragile than other citizens. Putting democracy to work. The rules were simple. There had to be a partnership of two entities, one coming from social economy and the other could as well be from the public sphere or citizens group. The money should go into social economy or the citizens group, never for public power, but they could participate as partners. This was an open program with no target audience, no specific territories, no assessment criteria that were closed, because the inequality of energy is different in terms of each point of the country, hence the difficulty. We had a set of conditions that were cross-sectional to many territories where we would feel that fragility, bad housing conditions, low income, a significant number of people at risk in case of COVID, well, a set of things. From the 7, we only had to fulfill 3, and if the local authority could not or did not want to assess the fulfillment of these conditions, the entity itself would certify it. What I'm trying to explain is something very challenging, because it's a public program. We need to be flexible, and I must reiterate, flexibility is very important, because we wanted to reach everyone as long as they would fulfill the goals of the program, which was that the public program should have public return. People could present projects of 5,000, 25,000 or 50,000 euros for projects that could go around these 5 axes. The challenge had a proper answer. I must say that during the public consultation period, 820 territories were identified by citizens, 774 projects were submitted in 35 days during the pandemic, and we were able to fund 246 projects with the 10 million euros we had for the program. This is not just a detail. In high-density areas, concentrating 80% of the population, we got 70% of tenders. In the hinterland regions, with 20% of the population, we had 30%. So this program went everywhere. And I like to think that it got where the resources were missed the most to leverage the transformation process. There was one other thing, which was not just addressing people who were identified with what we are describing. Not just in their territories. We wanted to address those who did not know this existed, the connection between social inequality and inequality in terms of health. So we made a partnership with the newspaper Público, where we prepared this presentation proving that the more disadvantageous situations in terms of precariousness, lack of a school degree, low income, the greater would be the incidence of certain diseases. One thing is, like it happens in my family, everyone has diabetes because of a crazy gene. A different thing is to develop diseases because we are exposed to risk factors. This was a bit what we tried to explain. We located 26 functional units of health with red dots, and then we adjusted the size of each of the points in terms of identified cases of stroke by functional unit of health, understanding that there were many differences. In the richer part of the country, in the region of Foz do Douro, it was 1.1 below the national average. In the poorest, in Campanhã, it was 2.4. In the northern region, the percentage was around 1.4%. Starting from the team of physicians that are part of the National Neighborhoods in partnership with the Faculty of Architecture and the Public Health School, we try to understand the connection between academic qualifications, precariousness in terms of housing, and we have identified a set of trends that were located in the oriental area of the city, historically poorer in Porto, and then we made an overlap with what we call the islands. Islands are habitational structures that started in the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, houses with 20 square meters, many times with no lighting, many times with an external bathroom. They call it islands. It's kind of slum. According to WHO, life conditions represent 30% of health inequalities, and the issues of housing, it's one of the greatest factors. And let me return to my presentation, because while we were building upon this evidence that there are social factors that create social inequalities artificially, making people more subjective to risk, we had a public tender that brought these results. 516 informal entities were mobilized, with 1,500 entities of public entities and 1,803 entities of the social economy. In the maps, you have each one of the entities, and the darker the color, the greater the intensity of each one of the above-mentioned groups. The program did not stop there. In this map, you can see the tenders that were funded, but also the connections. People who got partners, people from Porto got partners from Coimbra, Lisboa, Évora. This helped to unblock an energy that was in the territory with people who wanted to do things, wanted to participate in social transformation, wanted to be actors of that social transformation that could not happen if it was top-down. It had to be from the bottom up. People have to tell them what the symptoms are, how will they fit into an extended disease. And I do have an example to prove that this can get to housing too. In the picture, you see an island. As I explained before what it is, it's one of the funded projects in the parish of Campanhã, one of the highest rates of strokes. And in the picture you see Jacinta Reis. She's an architect, she's 27, and since she finished her course, she made a question few architects do. Why do I work? To whom do I work? And she faced the same problem that I did when I started working with the Roma community. There are no productive structure. On the other side, those who have money have access to qualified technicians. Those who don't have money are exposed to all these factors of inequality, and don't have access to technicians that can help them to exit this situation. Jacinta asked herself how could she change and transform this situation, taking architecture to people who usually cannot pay the services of an architect. She built with other architects a partnership with the local parish of 𝐃𝐲𝐬, with the University of Coimbra, and more than just rehabilitating houses, they want to leverage a social transformation starting from housing. This means gaining the trust of people, of populations, creating criteria of intervention, convincing owners that long-term renting is something that tenants need, helping to fulfill the general regulation of urban buildings, helping people to have decent lives, being not the exception, but the rule. Let me finish with my last slide, and this is my initial idea of putting life at the center. We need public housing to serve citizens. It's very important to give priority to life, put life at the center, not houses, not diplomas, not keeping technicians away from citizens. Life. That's what is important. Life teaches us a lesson. There is always someone who wants to do something. And now it's for people who are in the room, in public institutions. If you have someone in the field who has an idea, who wants to do something, listen to them, give them means, because no one does anything alone. In the picture we have our mentor, creator of the program Rosetta, when in this picture she had the same age as Jacinta, 27 years of age. So if you have someone with ideas that are different for the territory, listen to them, give them means, because when they get to the field, well, in 𝐃𝐲𝐬 you can find proximity structures that are now trying to implement what people need, which is structuring changes in their life. This 10 million program will not change inequalities, but the challenge is very important to ask people what they need, what they want. So when you are prevented to act because of the problems and you need to do everything to overcome it, solutions coming from the field do work, and they need the support of public power to be accessible, sustainable, and long-lasting. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Heitor, for this presentation, and congratulations to the project team and to the extended network of partners in terms of social transformation, and all the best for implementing the project in the communities of proximity. Let's now start with the next panel, Rehabiting Cities, the Challenges of Democracy and New Urban Centers. We have Alice Pittini. She's the Research Director at Housing Europe, the European Federation of Public, Cooperative and Social Housing, with more than 10 years of professional experience in social housing and affordable housing. She leads the Housing Europe Observatory, and she's the head for providing strategic counseling to the political work in Europe in the area of housing and to draft studies, including biannual reports of the state of housing in Europe. She's worked in the OECD as an economist and political analyst, creating a new database on housing on affordable prices. Let me give the floor now to Alice Pittini.
Thank you very much for this introduction. So I will now share my screen just to share with you a short presentation on a recent work that we've carried out at the Housing Europe Observatory on the theme of around the theme of aging. So there you go. I hope you can see my screen. Yes. So just to give you an idea of the context, when we think about aging in Europe, of course, Europe's population is getting older. This has been clearly identified as a key societal challenge by the European Union. Just to name a few recent initiatives, the European Commission published earlier this year a green paper on aging, really looking at the challenges and opportunities linked to an aging society. Most recently, the declaration resulting from the Porto summit of the EU Portuguese presidency highlighted the need to make sure to avoid exclusion of particularly vulnerable groups, including elderly people. So, as I said before, this is really a clear priority at European level. Also, of course, the current pandemic has shed further light on the need for homes that allow European people to age with dignity, and for supporting measures to also help avoiding social isolation. What it means for the social housing sector, recently in a 2020 report, the OECD highlighted that the fact that there is an increasing share of elderly people living in social housing implies a need to adapt the dwellings, but also the surroundings, environment, and the support services to the residents. So what does it mean for housing providers across Europe is that basically they will have to adapt and work on both the buildings that they provide and manage, but also the service that they ensure are available to the residents, together in partnership with other services providers and the local municipalities. Also important to think why we should focus on housing when thinking of aging demographics. So, of course, housing is key in guaranteeing healthy living and well-being because of his characteristics, so the physical characteristics of the dwellings, but also because of location and as a basis to access other services and to access all aspects of urban life. And secondly, of course, housing has a strong impact on the capacity of people to live independently, but also to move, enjoy social relations, and so on and so forth. So, as mentioned before, the European population is getting older. It's estimated that by 2070, a third of the European population will be constituted by people aged 65 or over. And by that year, the percentage of people aged 80 plus will have more than doubled, reaching about 13% of the population. So really a significant change in the demographic pyramid in the coming years. Of course, one of the key achievements of our societies, I would say, is that people live longer and healthier lives. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that currently about a half of those aged 65 plus report they have difficulties dealing with the personal care or other daily tasks, and more or less the same share of people has a disability or an impediment of some sort. So given this context, if we look at housing and whether housing is apt to house an increasingly aging population, we can estimate that about 70 to 80% of the existing housing stock across Europe is unsuitable for independent living. Of course, this changes very much from one country to another. Just to give you an idea, for instance, there's a current estimated need of about 2 million adapted homes in Germany. In the UK, a recent inquiry has highlighted that more than 90% of the housing stock is not suitable for independent living. So there's clearly a lot to do when it comes to adaptation of the current stock. Also important, especially older people living alone are more likely to face energy poverty. Currently, about 1 out of 10 people aged 65 plus are facing difficulties with paying their bills and keeping their homes warm. At the same time, they're also the ones that are more prone to have financial difficulties linked to housing, and especially elderly women living alone. So, of course, it's also important to highlight the need for homes to be adapted and suitable, but also affordable from many points of view. I also wanted to highlight that in this context, of course, the situation changes from one country to another, and Portugal is one of the countries that probably sees this trend of an aging population as most pressing. As you can see here, by the 2040, it's estimated that Portugal will have the second highest share of elderly people in Europe. So, as I mentioned before, the current pandemic has exposed many of the shortcomings of linked with the housing markets and housing conditions across Europe today. But I think this is particularly true if we look at older people. They were, of course, the one most exposed to problems such as loneliness, increasing mental health issues. Also, what we saw is that living in a care home has meant an increased risk of exposure to COVID-19 compared to living in independent housing solutions. So it's important to take stock of the situation and think what it means in the medium to long term, and especially keep in mind that there is likely to be an even stronger trend towards deinstitutionalization and towards independent living solutions. So what we're talking about here is really about thinking together on how to make the housing we provide future-proofed. What it means in practice, it's of course about building new homes according to accessibility standards, but also adapting the existing stock, as we mentioned before. It's also about the provision of a range of additional services, such as care and support, to help people living independently. Also consider the dimension of the neighborhoods, so that homes have to be safe and connected, and in neighborhoods that are accessible, that also have mixed use, so where it's possible for people to access transports, healthcare, and services. Of course, participation and social inclusion are key. And this is why it's also important to consider options such as shared living solutions for those who might wish to live in such innovative projects such as co-housing and intergenerational living. What we did at Housing Europe is to launch a survey of our members, trying to gather good ideas and good examples of what they're doing on the ground to improve and guarantee better living conditions to their elderly residents. There are, of course, really an impressive range of solutions and examples, but here I will mention only some that I think are particularly relevant. This one is, for instance, an example of a French organization that provides services two social housing companies, Delphis, and they have come up with a label that is called Habitat Senior Service, which is basically a tool to help housing providers define a strategy towards aging that includes adapting the dwelling surroundings and shared areas, ensuring comfortable and secure homes, and also providing access to local services through partnership with the municipalities, with the municipal services. This is today used by about 40 housing organizations, providing more than 3,000 homes through this scheme. Another interesting example I find is that of, well, a number actually of housing associations in the UK, but this one, 𝐃𝐲𝐬 Housing, is particularly specialized in providing support services, including supported accommodation and independent living services. What is also interesting is that they do it for their tenants, but their services are also open to all residents in the local community. What kind of innovative ideas they've come up with? I think probably a very interesting example is the step-down homes that are targeting people who are basically ready to leave the hospital, but not to go back to their living situation as before yet. And so they offer supported apartments where basically people can live independently, but also are visited every day by healthcare specialists and can access a number of additional services. And this, interestingly, has a cost of about £70 per week, while hospitalization would have been more than 350. So it's also interesting from a financial point of view. This example from Sweden, I thought was also really interesting, and as you can see here, has really raised some attention internationally. It's called SOLBO, Community Living, and it's run by the public housing company in Helsingborg. What this project is about is a former retirement home that has been transformed into public housing building with 51 apartments, and it's really characterized by a really high level of mix and community engagement. So half of the residents are over 70s, and the rest are aged between 18 and 25, with a mix of personalities, backgrounds, religions, and where everyone commits when entering this project to spend at least 2 hours per week socializing with their neighbors. This is another interesting example. We've seen before that today it's estimated that about half of people aged 65 plus live in under-occupied homes. So homes that are basically too big for them. Typical situation where, for instance, the kids have left home and the parents keep living in there. So what the Dutch housing associations have started some years ago is a special real estate agent service that helps older people to find homes that are more suitable and affordable within the housing stock of the housing corporation, so that they can basically move to something that is more suited to their needs. And this helps both seniors who find indeed more suitable accommodations, but it also means it frees up available homes for those on waiting lists. So this model has proved to be quite successful, and it's since it started spread among the whole housing corporation sector, and it really increases mobility and helps better matching homes to the needs of households. There are, of course, as I mentioned before, many more examples, and those are available in a dedicated briefing, Aging Well at Home, that we recently published. And there's also a lot of really interesting resources on our Housing Evolution website. But I want to focus before closing my presentation on the most significant lessons learned from this exercise, and also lessons for policymakers. So first of all, it's important to remind that designing homes that are adapted and accessible is good for all and not just for older people. It's also important to highlight that because the needs of older people are so diverse, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and it's really important to involve users, but also include the different options in the local strategies aimed at tackling the aging challenge. Very key in this is establishing partnerships between the different actors and services providers at the local level, and of course in this the municipality can really play a key role as a one-stop shop. And last but not least, so public investment in safe supporting housing and related services can also bring a high social return, and this can mean savings for the public purse on the long term, for instance by allowing to avoid healthcare costs. There is really an increasing body of evidence on this. The most recent study that I've seen from Ireland, from the Housing Agency, really shows that the savings in terms of public budget related to providing supported housing can be up to 4,000 euros per year per household, compared to people keeping living in their current homes or moving to retirement homes. So we really have to start to think in terms of potential savings and investment in suitable homes as a long-term successful investment. So thank you very much. I end up here my presentation, and I will be available for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Muito obrigada pela intervenção e pela
Thank
análise
you
e reflexão sobre as necessidades do setor da habitação
for this
associada ao
food
conservatório
for
de
thought in
casa,
terms
ao
of
isolamento,
housing,
as
with
acessibilidades, a
aging
promoção
at
da
home,
independência e
isolation,
a qualidade de vida nas
accessibilities, and the
habitações,
quality of
especialmente
life
neste
in
período
houses,
pandémico.
especially
E
in
ainda
this
dentro do tema
pandemic
das
project.
cidades,
Within this
passaremos então à
subject,
apresentação
let's now give the floor
Employment and Housing
to the
Package,
subject Employment and
Julian
Housing
Dijol,
Package
em
by Julian
substituição de
Dijol,
Virginie Toussaint,
replacing
conselheira
Virginie
jurídica de
Toussaint,
l'Union Sociale
legal
pour
advisor
l'Habitat
at l'Union
Paris.
Sociale pour l'Habitat Youth.
Julian Dijol é
Julian Dijol,
secretário-geral
he is
adjunto
the
e coordenador
Deputy Secretary
de
General
políticas na Housing Europe,
and
coordena o
Policy
trabalho
Coordinator at
político
Housing
da
Europe,
Housing
coordinating the
Europe,
political
acompanhando o
work of
desenvolvimento
Housing
efetivo dos
Europe, following
resultados
up
e
the
redigindo
political
documentos de
relevant
decisão política das
developments, drafting the documents of
coordena também
decision
o
making
trabalho
of the
de todas as
organizations.
comissões
He
e
also
faz a ligação
coordinates the
entre as
work of all
mesmas
the
e
commissions
Bruxelas e
and
representa a
connects
Housing
them
Europe em vários
in
eventos sobre
Brussels and
habitação.
represents
E
Housing
antes de
Europe in
passar
many
a
events
palavra a
about housing.
Julian,
Before giving the floor
deixar
to
aqui o
Julia,
pedido da nossa produção
let me
para que partilhem, para que os
share with you
oradores
that
partilhem a janela
speakers
correspondente à
share
sua
the
apresentação
window
e
of
desta forma
their
obviamos
presentation
constrangimentos
so that
futuros.
we can
Muito
avoid
obrigada,
future
Julian
constraints.
Dijol, por favor.
Thank you. Julian Dijol, you have the floor.
Hello, good morning to all, and thank you for an invitation. Indeed, as you mentioned, our colleague from the French Social Housing Federation is not here today, so she asked me to show some of the slides. But what I would like to do, knowing that we're already running late and behind schedule, I would like to actually combine both presentations. So I will start with talking about some of the global context and solutions to the current challenges for social housing providers, and then we'll integrate the part on the French PAC Emploi Logement in there. I think it makes sense in the context. So I will share the screen. Voila. So there was indeed some problem at the beginning of Alice's presentation, so we couldn't see her screen. So please let me know if there is a problem. Send something on the chat, that would be great. Or just interrupt me with the microphone, it's fine. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the new housing responses, but we already mentioned that at the beginning with Sorka Edwards. There's actually 3 questions that we'd like to ask: is the context, the challenges, and indeed the responses. So I'll be very quick about the context. I think you know very well the fragile macroeconomic context in which housing policies try to operate. This is marked by, first of all, a structural de-investment in the sector since 2009. You can see it on the graph here, a graph from the OECD. So since 2009, we are a downward trend in terms of public spending on housing. And as you may imagine, 2020 will not see a reversed trend, so rather the contrary. So we're going to see in the coming years whether, particularly through the recovery and resilience plans from the European Union, whether this trend can be changed. Very briefly as well, sorry, I'm checking at the same time. Okay, very briefly as well, something which we found interesting is the perception of the risk from the side of the investors. In that case, from the Fitch ratings agency, was looking at the kind of risks that is perceived in the sector at the moment. And if you can look at all the risk, what is quite striking is that the change in regulation, well, whether it's in, well, they picked up 3 countries here, but change in regulation in general is considered as a risk for the from the perspective of the investors. I mean, we understand that, but looking at vacancy and unpaid rents, this remains as a medium risk, although COVID has certainly might change a bit the picture. Unpaid rents is something that we'll see, and we are seeing already in some countries, also in the social housing sector. And here's an example of the situation we mentioned before, the fragile economic context. This is in France, so I will not really dwell on too much, but it basically says on the left side, it's the blue line is the total support, public support for housing, and you see again since 2009 the constant decrease. And if you look at the percentage of different trend of the different forms of support within that, you see an increase of the housing allowances. So this is a green line compared to the orange line, which is direct support to house building. And on the right side, this is a graph showing the different products in France for social housing, knowing that you have products, very social housing, very social rent in a way, intermediary, and then rent, which are closer to the, a bit closer to the market rent, but still below. And what France is facing at the moment is a bit the same probably in other countries, is a strong demand from both ends, from the very social rent perspective, and particularly relation to the COVID crisis, but also from the perspective of the essential workers, key workers. So social housing providers are faced with an increasing demand for, at the same time, very social housing and housing for key workers. So how to operate, how to build in that context, and while being continue to be profitable, at least in the sense of self-sustaining. COVID has not really improved the situation, as you may imagine, and actually, contrary to the expectations and contrary to the 2009 global financial crisis, we've seen recently a sharp increase in house prices, and as usual, a flat, a steady rise in the rent level. Quite interestingly, what we see is a sharper increase in house pricing in rural areas compared to urban areas, which probably is the illustration or the consequence of what we call the run for space, where people want to have more space for the home working, as well as green spaces, gardens, and so on. So we'll come back to that at the end, because this is probably a big question mark also in terms of urban planning. What does it mean for urban planning? What does it mean for the reputation of social housing as well? We mentioned climate change also at the beginning as one of the challenges, and while this is a graph mentioning the the reduction of energy consumption in a sample of countries, and so the same goes for this other graph, which is the reduction of CO2 emission per square meter. And what we see is that I mean, we basically have a downward trend in all countries since the 90s. And one country which actually is really in a different level is Sweden, the line at the bottom, which has almost completely decarbonized its building stock. So we have an example of a country we managed already to do that, and we could dwell on a bit on what is the reason behind, but we don't have time now. But this is I mean, there are lessons to be learned in terms of policy mix, where they looked at decarbonization of heat, support for renovation of housing, but also, yeah, as I said, a strong incentives to go from the fossil fuel energy system to district heating, particularly based on biomass and waste to energy. Here, this is a graph from the German Housing Federation, which says something quite interesting. It's a tale of a story of the limit to energy efficiency and to the really important influence of the behavior of people. So the so-called rebound effect is a reality. We see in Germany basically a reduction of energy consumption by 31% between 1990 and 2010, and after that a kind of stagnation. And so people were wondering why we are seeing stagnation. Well, there are two reasons probably. First of all, it's because we start. I mean, Germany started very early the renovation wave. So at some point you reach a limit in terms of what you can renovate. And secondly, it's about the behavior of the residents and the fact that we need to accompany them. Also, probably there's some question related to the quality of the works, but I mean, this mix of different factors explain that at some point we may reach a limit to energy efficiency, and we need to really look at different factors, particularly supporting tenants, co-creating with them renovation projects. So it's important. So an important reminder of the importance of tenants' involvement, residents' involvement. And we have integrated solutions for that. We have integrated solutions regarding to the environmental aspect. Again, I'm not going to go too much on that. The main message here is to say that in the social housing sector, I mean, the big added value and probably the unique feature of social housing sector compared to the private sector is that when renovation takes place, it's really about changing the whole neighborhood, is making the neighborhood a place where people are proud to live in, while before it was really, I mean, deprived neighborhoods with high criminality rate, high unemployment rate. And we see plenty of examples of turning deprived neighborhood into something which is a really high quality and promoting social cohesion. So yeah, we'll skip this one. I wanted to talk about integrated solutions or integrated responses in relation to social cohesion. And this is where we have really great example of what social housing providers can do, and probably are the only one that can do that. First of all, here we have an example on the left of a very great example of a social housing company working together with association to support young children in their homework after school. but also incentivize them to do that by giving them privileged access to the football club, the local football club. And we are, right in the middle of Euro 2021. And by the way, good luck for Portugal tonight. And we see that so football, it could be a way to attract and to incentivize young people from the social housing sector to accept the support and basically have a better results at school. So this is I think one example which I find quite telling and interesting. And another example on the right side is 𝐂𝐲𝐬𝐧𝐠. So in the Netherlands, it's really about housing first. We heard a lot about housing first, and sometimes we don't know exactly how things work, but this is clearly something that has been now growing since the last decade. And social housing providers are an essential part of housing first approach, because they're the one providing the affordable homes. So great example of 𝐂𝐲𝐬𝐧𝐠 in the Netherlands in cooperation with the Dutch Social Housing Federation, 𝐂𝐡𝐴DIS. And this is something that Alice mentioned before. So this great example of mix between refugees and senior people in Sweden. Yes. Now to conclude that part of the presentation, I wanted to talk about some uncertainties that we are facing in the social housing sector, and also uncertainties for urban and local authorities. First of all, has COVID boosted the aspiration for the house with garden? I mentioned that before, the run for space. So it means that maybe the reputation of social housing as being multifamily buildings in very urban context, in urban areas, maybe this reputation has been further damaged. So how can we do the work to improve that image of social housing, knowing all the great thing that social housing is bringing to social cohesion and welfare state? Another question is, how can governments cope with growing inequalities in housing? There's no doubt that COVID will increase inequalities in general. This is the World Bank telling us that this will happen, and this probably will translate into growing housing inequalities as well, because the rich will be able to indeed go for space and high quality of life, while low-income people who already have suffered a lot from the crisis will probably end up having a really limited number of options in terms of limited number of housing options. So this is a tough question for local governments. And to conclude, what skills are needed within cities and housing companies to face all the new challenges? And what skills in terms of procurement, in terms of training for housing first, for independent living as well, as mentioned by Alice. So a lot of questions regarding the skills and whether the local authorities and housing companies will have the funding to really skill up and increase their competence. So I'll stop here. I just will mention briefly one of the example of integrated response for social cohesion was indeed about the French approach on mixing housing and employment. So if you bear with me a few minutes, this is the PAC Emploi Logement, Employment and Housing Package in France, and the idea was quite simple. It was really about helping young residents, often are what we call NEET, so not in employment and education in training, so helping them to be closer to the employment market, to increase their employability, as we say, while at the same time caring for their housing solutions. So the French Federation, the National Federation, has created this kind of partnership at the national level, which has been then translated into the regional level, which is about bringing so the social housing providers with the association or services, which are really about improving the employability of young people. This is also, so first there's one branch which is really looking at the residents who are already in the social housing sector. But most interestingly, probably for young people, is that those young people who are not yet in the social housing sector, they are basically above 18-year-old or even above 25-year-old. So they are applying for social housing, and at the same time they are looking for a job. So the social housing organization will work with them to provide the services to help them getting a job, and also to in a way have a privileged, not a privileged access to social housing, because this was of course a tricky questions, but at least they will have an individual follow-up, individual support to help them finding social housing, so an accommodation within the social housing stock. And so you see here, a specific operator will take charge of the appropriate research of job through various partnerships. So there was an operator that will really work with the person and will try to find out a traineeship or apprenticeship. And in terms of housing, a social landlord will be designated to facilitate the access to housing. So this is for young people under 30-year-olds. So I will stop here. I mean, this is something that has started in 2018 and is going on. But of course, the question of the funding remain important, because all this has other costs. And socializing organizations in France are really looking at how to scale up and how to have a funding for that. So yeah, thank you very much. I hope it gives you some ideas about what the sector was doing. And yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Julia, muito obrigada por este momento e por este.
Thank you, Julia, for this moment and this context of macroeconomy in the housing sector and the integrated solutions for social cohesion, which are very important within the context of our area, and of course highlighting the last part of your presentation of proximity of youngsters to employment and integration with access to housing. The next subject will be demographic challenges in new urban centers, strategic plan of the Institute of Construction and 𝐂𝐤𝐬𝐳. The strategy of the EU for the renovation wave brings new concerns that translate in directives to properly execute the actions of reusing construction materials. Before this policy, 𝐂𝐤𝐬𝐳 and Gebalis were developing actions to identify potential improvements within processes, aiming for a greater efficiency in cost, sustainability in the environment, and stock management of building materials. The next intervention is by 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, researcher of civil engineering and project manager, to talk about the strategic plan of 𝐂𝐤𝐬𝐳 for promoting actions within the strategy renovation wave. 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, welcome. Good morning, thank you. Let me share my screen.
Ora, pedi só confirmação de que estão a ver o meu ecrã.
Can you see my screen?
Sim? Ok. Então vou fazer a apresentação em inglês.
I will speak in
Pedro Meda.
English.
I'm a civil engineer at Instituto da Construção, Porto University. Before starting, I would like to thank 𝐂𝐤𝐬𝐳 to be here presenting this joint effort still under development and aim to accomplish several goals, most of them aligned with the renovation wave. Therefore, the title of this presentation, 𝐂𝐤𝐬𝐳 Strategic Plan, the Spearhead Towards Renovation Wave. Starting with a short overview on the actions timeline, this relationship starts after a major fire in a private building at Matosinhos municipality. This led to the work that Professor Miguel Chichorro will present in detail just after my presentation. From that work, several actions were identified leading to the development of this strategic plan. These would consist in several tasks throughout the following years, where Matosinhos Habit Board vision played an essential role. All the tasks and developments were agreed prior to important moments, such as the publication of the EU Renovation Wave strategy or the new version of the Portuguese Public Procurement Code, meaning that all works born aligned in advance with these documents. The strategic plan logo that was defined aims to communicate three fundamental dimensions of the work. First, improved processes, collaboration, knowledge, guidelines, and specifications and competencies. Second, performance and risk awareness, improved management of building stock and streamlined maintenance. And efficiency goals at management and finance first, environment and energy after. These can be summarized on the following headlines: processes and digitalization, improved and performance management, efficiency and sustainability. The strategic plan is focused on the building stock, and its results were thought to align with the construction life cycle phases. The following slides will present an overview on some of the developments that were made. In a glance, this slide aims to evidence the amount of actions and results cut crossing all the construction life cycle phases. It is essential to highlight that these results were only possible due to the collaborative effort of Instituto da Construção and Matosinhos Habit professionals, namely those from the Design and Construction Department and Law Department, such as Arquiteto Pedro Canedo, Engenheiro Luís Magalhães e Doutora Márcia Saraiva. The improvement of the design documents and build stock characterization were the first actions that we worked, and we identified it as main concerns. The definition of template documents for preliminary programs were set on the very beginning, as well as improved requirements for building renovation actions. Likewise, the building characterization spreadsheets were developed to become part of a future multidimensional and multi-phase digital building logbook. The design requirements became summarized in the preliminary program, but don't run out there. Several design guidelines and templates were developed to foster improved deliverables, more standardized and digital ready, such as common data environment repositories, maintenance plans, and work specifications. As this effort must be made by the whole value chain, the requirements, the guidelines, and the templates spread for the contractor agreements and to the construction phase. All the elements are geared to feed the information and management needs for the handover and use phase. So building characterization spreadsheets relate with maintenance requirements as elements identification, providing the background for maintenance activities and schedules to improve asset management strategies and life cycle performance. The strategic plan, as mentioned, is an ongoing task. So in addition, from this fruitful collaboration, Matosinhos Habit is a partner in the Growing Circle project, that is the Instituto da Construção and Trondheim University project funded by EEA grants. Matosinhos Habit will provide case studies that will lead to several results in terms of environmental goals, namely improved processes towards green public procurement, environmental aid guidelines, and streamlined identification of materials to reuse and recycle to accomplish and surpass the defined targets on the regulations. So as evidence, Matosinhos Habit's strategic plan was designed to improve several processes and several activities across the entity and the construction value chain. By doing that, many results are already aligned with the renovation strategy, and the scope is to implement the actions and trends as soon as possible to provide results on these achieved outcomes. So, in a nutshell, how do we see it happening? According with the renovation wave strategy, the actions are framed in groups as here present in this slide. From what was previously mentioned, it is possible to understand that the goals frame mostly in some of these groups, but there are touch points with other that are interesting to highlight and that are being envisaged for future developments. There are relationships between these actions and the strategic plan outcomes, namely, all the guidelines and requirements are aligned to build and obtain a life cycle performance roadmap of the buildings. The developments overlap in different actions. One where we find most common points is the building renovation requirements that links with other in different groups. Design and construction specifications, new requirements for all stakeholders, new data management tools are some of the aspects that embody this action potential outcomes. This next stage combines different challenges from information management and traceability to green procurement and environmental goals. Given the diversity of the topics, these would deserve, I would say, a specific slide and specific words focused on each one of them. First, the framework for future digital building logbooks that is already being built based upon the building's data collection and future trends. New procurement guidelines were set and already successfully tested. Contract manager tools will be soon available to improve global procedures management and therefore jump to, I would say, green public procurement. In terms of sustainability and environment, as mentioned, pilot studies within the Growing Circle project will produce outcomes where Matosinhos Habit will be a first-hand beneficiary. From these outputs, we seek to get the experience to evolve to more circular processes that will leverage, among others, climate efficiency and CO2 targets. To end, collaborative work together with training, awareness, and follow-up is a must-be and a constant when implementing new processes and outcomes. So, briefly summarize, this is how we see it happening, combining what has been developed and will continue to be within the Matosinhos Habit strategic plan with the renovation action, with the renovation wave actions. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Pedro, pela abordagem técnica desta feita mais virada totalmente virada para a engenharia civil e para a reabilitação.
Under the civil engineering and rehabilitation, very interesting. Let's now go to fire hazard in buildings and the managing of the city. We have 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜𝐬. I think that we have Professor Miguel online. I don't know if you can see me.
Conseguem ver? Ok. Obrigado pela informação.
Is it working? Okay, thank you.
Que agora já estejam a ver, não é verdade?
I think that this is clear.
Bem, vou seguir agora o resto da apresentação em inglês.
Let me follow the presentation in English. Thank you.
This presentation, I will address the problem from the fire safety analysis to fire safety management challenges and requirements. I will present what has been done for Matosinhos and particularly Matosinhos Habit and what can be done in near future. Fire safety will be addressed in 7 topics in this presentation. What triggered the fire safety perception, the responsibility of authorities, the case study of this case, fire safety analysis, fire safety management, challenges to the future, requirements, and some conclusions. The fire safety perception of Matosinhos City Hall were triggered by the large recent fires, in first place the Grenfell Tower in London, and being aware of the Great Fire in Chiado, Lisbon, which had a great impact on our codes in fire safety engineering. It's perceived that this theme remains current with the most recent fire like the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and others. The responsibility. The priority function of the state to the buildings are the safety of life. Therefore, the measures promoted by the codes are the application of these 5 protection concepts. Reduce the probability of fire occurrence, limit the development of possible fires, circumscribing and minimizing their effects, facilitate the evacuation and rescue of occupants at risk, and allow the effective and safe intervention of the means of assistance. Most recently, facing fire situation experienced in Portugal in 2017, it has been established the principle of accountability of entities that own the buildings or premises and entities that hold the operation of the buildings. So, in February 2018, the state has imposed the obligation of determine the self-verification of compliance with fire safety conditions in accordance with the applicable legislation by the entities responsible for managing the buildings. So, Matosinhos City Hall has had this obligation for all buildings under its management. It is important to say that legislation defines the framework of buildings in 12 types of uses and 4 risk categories, and the measures of protection are proportional to these 2 aspects. The case study. Well, the work required by City Hall and Matosinhos to Construction Institute and Faculty of Engineering of University of Porto has corresponded to 54 housing complexes, more than 100 buildings, more than 1,400 dwellings, and more than 100 uses type. Initially, 7 housing complexes were studied, beginning the Cruz de Pau Antigo housing complexes. Fire safety analysis, building by building. The work was developed in 2 major tasks. The first of all, the fire risk assessment and characterization, and the second one, self-protection measures, on which the following 4 subtasks stand out in the first task. The first subtask, identification of the type used. The second, identification of the specific verification needs of the fire risk. The discussion meetings with Matosinhos Habit, and finally, characterization of fire risk itself. But more important was the definition of deliverables. The first, diagnosis report, the fire risk assessment grid, intervention grid, and potential measures to reduce fire risk of that building, what I will present briefly. In the first of all, diagnosis report, the most important was the characterization of parameters like the height of use type of buildings, the distance that each fire brigade was and the access time to the housing complex, the state of building conservation and the positioning of hydrants, and it was thus possible to characterize the type of use and the risk category. The fire risk assessment grid was previously established and has this quantification: 4 levels of fire risk assessed by the probability and the consequences of the fire. And the 3 types of fire protection measures were also established: the construction provisions, the technical equipment, and safety systems. So it was thus possible, with a description of each of those types of protections, to define the intermediate values of this fire risk. At the end, it was possible summarizing at the fire risk of each housing complex. Performing here the statistical analysis of fire risk of all housing complexes. But the most important was established the intervention grid and respective priority that is correctly being implemented in each work that 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐜 is promoting at this time in some works in 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐜. The work then is important to establish the potential measures to reduce the fire risk. But it's very important to take into consideration the existence of those fire risk protection measures will only be effective if it is cumulatively guaranteed that users are aware of these measures and know how to use them for their safety. And secondly, measurements are maintained over time, keeping them permanently operational. So, the fire safety management. The other aspect of fire safety is the use of buildings in which there is a legal requirement to implement the so-called self-protection measures. The subtasks of this second task were these: the framework of self-protection measures, the priority of actions and implementation, and finally discussion meetings with 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐜. The deliverables for this task were as follows: the self-protection measures, implementation guide, the models type, training and drill guides. The legal requirement for each housing complex was analyzed, and 3 guides materialized for the various typical uses found in housing complexes. So let's see the challenge for the future are to implement all these analyses in powerful methodologies such as those to be already applied in many Portuguese cities, starting with the urban rehabilitation area of Matosinhos city, starting with the urban rehabilitation area of Matosinhos city, and starting from information already available by the City Hall, such as the uses type and state of conservation of the buildings, among other parameters such as the following. For example, the conditional use, conservation state, access by firefighters, etc. This method was applied to an area of this city marked here. The left image shows the fire risk of about 150 buildings, and this method allows the incorporation of 35 active and passive fire safety measures, and after an exhaustive and optimized study, it was possible to reduce the fire risk of each building to the risk map visible on the right image. Performing here at this slide the statistical analysis of risk reduction in studied area. So the same study was carried out for the historic zone of Porto and 6 other cities in Portugal. And so we have the requirements. For the future, everything is within our reach, just as requirements, the political interest, the availability of software developed at FEUP, georeferenciation of information, data needed to calculate fire risk, and some conclusions at the end. The pandemic situation caused by COVID-19 has strengthened from 50 to over 80 the role of housing as spaces for families to remain to multiple activities. Therefore, the fire safety of these buildings must be framed in accordance with space according to the use of multiple functions. This importance requires public technical structures capable and endowed with instruments like the one presented. So thank you very much for your attention.
Muito obrigada pela partilha neste tema com impactos
Thank you for
tanto
sharing
disponíveis nas cidades.
with a subject that has such an
Avancemos então
impact
para o
on
painel
cities. Let's move
social,
forward
o desafio da
for
transição
social
de uma
housing, the
economia
challenge of the
linear
transition
para uma
of the linear
economia
economy
circular,
into a circular
com o
economy,
tema
with a
BMI,
subject
para os
BIM,
municípios, a
Building Information
automatização
Modeling
digital.
for municipalities, the
Embora as
digital
plataformas
automation.
automatizadas
Although
de identificação de
automated
código sejam
platforms
alvo
of
de
code
debate,
verification are a
de
target of debate,
desenvolvimento
of
e testes
development
durante
and
décadas,
testing
o caminho
for
para a
decades,
automatização
the
digital
path
está
to
longe de
digital
ter
automation is far from
na breve
over.
apresentação que
In
se
this short
segue,
presentation
perguntaríamos
that
por que
follows, we
razão
will ask
a
why
verificação de códigos
code
ainda é
verification is still
maioritariamente realizada
mainly
por humanos
performed by humans,
e exploraremos
and
possíveis
explore
soluções
possible
para automatizar
solutions
estes
to
processos.
automate these processes.
Convido para nos
I would
esclarecer
like
sobre
to
o tema
invite
João Pedro
to
Poças
talk to us
Martins,
about the
professor
subject
assistente da
João
Faculdade
Poças
de Engenharia da
Martins.
Universidade de
He's a
Porto.
lecturer of the University
Penso que já
of Porto,
temos.
Faculty of Engineering.
Olá, viva.
Hello.
Muito bom dia.
Good morning.
Agradeço o convite.
Thank you for
Eu
having
vou
me.
fazer a minha apresentação em inglês.
I
Peço
will
a
make
vossa
my
paciência,
presentation in
só agora neste
English.
segundo habitual
I would
vamos fazer
ask
aquela
you
passagem
to
habitual
be
em que eu faço para o
patient
meu PowerPoint e depois vou falar
because I would
então
like
acerca
to
da
share
licença
my
ambiental.
PowerPoint and then tell you about
Vamos
automatic
ver se consigo fazer
licensing.
esta passagem rapidamente.
Let's see if I can do this quickly.
Segundo. Peço desculpa.
I do apologize.
E é... Peço desculpa, será este, creio. Portanto,
I believe
espero que consigam
that
ver,
you can already
espero que consigam ver
see
então a minha
my
apresentação.
screen and my presentation.
Vamos falar então, I'll switch to English now then.
Let's go into English.
Digital permitting is something that will look like this. This is an overview of what we mean when we are discussing digital permitting. And so we will have a platform where a designer is able to submit his idea, his design about the building, and then we will have some sort of a black box that includes building codes that will be checked automatically by a computer, by a machine, and then retrieves and then returns a verdict. And the verdict is just a yes/no answer to the question: is this design compliant with the building rules that apply? So, in short, digital permitting will include a submission platform. It will also include a code checking module. Since I believe digital submission is a problem that is more easily solved, I will focus my attention in this short presentation in the part that relates to code checking compliance. And actually, we don't only want to check building codes. Beside the building codes, we often want to check if the process itself is adequate. So we will check if delivery milestones are being met. So if people submit the right elements at the right time, and if the representation rules are met, such as line types, file formats, and so on. And so we were checking not only for building codes, but also for delivery and process rules. So this would be the more general idea. We will have a design that has to be able to be interpreted by a machine. And so it will be submitted as a BIM model. We will have codes, building codes and delivery process rules that are coded as a computer program, such as we can see over here. And then at the end of the process, we will get a verdict. And the verdict is not usually as clean cut as we would like. So we don't just have yeses and nos. We will often get, I don't know as an answer. But we will also have a report that justifies the decision that is made by a computer. And that's very helpful. So we've had examples of code checking platforms for quite a long time now. We don't see them every day. We will discuss that later on. But this is a topic that's been with us for over 20 years. Probably one of the main examples, one of the best known examples, is the COREnet platform in Singapore. And as you can see from this picture, this is quite an old example. See, this is extracted from a web browser almost 20 years ago now. So you can see that this is for Internet Explorer 5. So you understand how old this is. And so the platform included the modules that we would expect for a real permitting system. So we will have a code checking platform that verifies if the main code building codes are being complied with. We will have a submission platform so that designers can access the website and send their designs. And then we will have a repository of general rules, so designers know what's expected from them when they access the platform. We will also have probably the prime example of a bin checking tool, which is called Solibri Model Checker, which is available, and it's software that exists and it's very popular still today. And it can be used for code checking, but it can also be used for other purposes as well. And over here we see on the window on the right, on the left, you'll see some examples of codes, international codes, that are currently checkable by Solibri. We have also examples from Norway. This, I'm sorry, I will not try to pronounce this because I have no knowledge of Norwegian, and so I think our next speaker might help us with this. But so this is an example of a code checking platform that was presented in 2003. Our colleagues from the United States also developed the AutoCodes platform. This was actually stopped quite early on, but they developed early checks on the American building codes. And in Portugal, in 2009, in FIUP, we also presented our own work. So for people who are interested in these kinds of examples, in 2018, a book came out by a professor and a researcher from the States, where you can read about this. This is from 2018, so all of the previous examples have been covered in this quite comprehensive book on this topic. We've also kept going with this research at FIUP, and so throughout these years, these are some of the examples that we have followed. And so we have platforms that work for sustainability, so for stormwater runoff analysis, for fire safety, in this case for the Chinese regulations. This is developed by a Chinese researcher, and also for design quality, etc. So we've had several of these works in the past. So if we have 20 plus years of experience, and if this is just such a good idea, then where is code checking all around us? It should be all around. And in 2018, we had an article on a popular online web journal, which was quite scathing to code checking compliance efforts. And so most of these efforts, especially the public funded ones in Singapore and so on, have stalled. So they have found many difficulties that were perhaps difficult to fathom in the beginning, but they do face users in real world applications. And so for a short presentation, I will just focus on two main fields of difficulties, of challenges that make it difficult for us to apply rule-based code checking platforms. And so they can be technical and they can be human in nature. And I will talk about difficulties in the regulations that we have, in the models that we have, and the behavior of the users of these platforms. So very quickly, starting with the regulations, every time we try and develop a code checking platform, we start by looking at the regulations. And if we try to look at a building code from the point of view of a computer program, we will find rules that are very easy to verify, such as which kind of materials are allowed in the networks that supply water to our homes. We will find very difficult rules, such as ones that require calculations. so to simulate the flow of water or to simulate the structural behavior of a building. And then we will find rules that are almost or are really impossible to be verified because they are subjective in nature. So an example is from our water supply regulations in Portugal, water meters should be placed close to the entrance of a building and in an easily accessible place. And so good luck trying to explain that to a computer. A second difficulty relates to the design models, and design models can deceive us. So I put up a picture over there, a painting from Magritte. It's usually called a treachery of images, and so the images can fool us. In this case, this is an example from a student of ours who did a study on accessibility in Philip's building, in our university building. And the results came out that the corridors did not meet the required width, which was alarming because the building is already there. And what we found out was the problem was with the model itself. And so the elevator shafts were actually modeled as corridors, and so they did not meet the required width because they weren't really corridors. There was a mistake. And so BIM models can fool us because not everything that is in the model is actually real. Which leads us to the last of the challenges, which is the behavior. So these mistakes can be due to just honest mistakes by the designers, such as the case that I presented just now. And the designers can address these mistakes by correcting them, and that would be an honest way to move forward, or they can be addressed in a fraudulent manner. So don't forget that these are rule-based systems, and so basically rule-based systems are always systems that are based on if-then rules. So in this drawing, for instance, a computer program said, if there is a boiler to produce hot water in the building, then there must be valves upstream and downstream from the boiler. Okay, and so in a fraudulent point of view, a modeler can simply change the type of element, which is the boiler, and change it to something like a cupboard or a wardrobe or something like that. And so the code checking platform will not pick up on that mistake. And so it's very difficult to create a system that is resistant and resilient to this kinds of human mistakes. We have new solutions for these problems, and we can move forward with code platforms, with code checking platforms. One of the new solutions that we have is BIM maturity. We are far ahead in terms of BIM maturity than we were 20 years ago. So we have excellent international standards. In many countries, BIM is now mandatory for, and so we will have more experience, much more experience in public and private works across Europe. And so this is one thing that helps us produce strong platforms for BIM code checking. And then we have, from a procedure point of view, we have artificial intelligence approaches that are starting to be developed. And this is just a drawing from an entrance. And so just picking up on the problematic question that I placed earlier, I think any human can look at this drawing and answer very clearly to the question, is this meter located close to the entrance and in an easily accessible place? And I think obviously the answer is yes. It's obviously close and it's obviously accessible. Artificial intelligence approaches allow us to emulate the behavior of a human who will be looking at these problems, and they will try to copy the decisions of a human, even if we can't explain exactly why the results come out the way that they do. So of course they need a lot of data, a lot of models, and a lot of decisions to be able to do this, but they are quite flexible, and that's very helpful. Final slide. So why should we adopt BIM-based digital permitting if there are several challenges that still stand? And there are three main reasons that I would like to propose. One of them is from a responsibility point of view. We are discussing public entities, and these public entities can help promote standard digital processes in construction, and so improve the construction industry by demanding designers to deliver digital models and then working with these models. As a second reason, we need a lot of data to be able to feed data-driven processes. And so machine learning algorithms need a lot of data, and so we need good repositories, and these can only be developed if the whole community feeds these repositories with models, with BIM models. Finally, and this is the image that's illustrated here on the right, if we want, and this is actually a good segue for the presentation next to mine, if we want to be able to build city models that replicate the behavior of the real city, and so that allow us to simulate and to provide us with real-time information to support our decisions, then again, we need a lot of data. This is an example, again, from Singapore. This is called Virtual Singapore, and in this case, this is a module for analysis of potential for solar energy production. And so for these reasons, I believe that we can harness some of the advantages of code checking platforms right now, and these are actually advantages for the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you soon.
Muito obrigada, João, por nos ter trazido.
Thank you, João, for this technological innovation and how it can work in work processes and the challenges that are associated to it. And as I said, we will start and continue with this subject. Data have a very important part in environment, the life of people, and the goals of sustainability are based in improvement in data usage, since it's gathering, security, traceability, updating, and management. This data might vary from personal data to building data, or at a scale of a city. By gathering different strategies, since healthy neighborhood to digitization to renovation wave, the subsector of residential housing might become the forefront in the proper usage of data with successful results that are adjacent. And now we will have the intervention of 𝐂𝐬𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜, assistant professor in digitization of construction, talking about digital twin in public housing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, try to take this. Let's see, share screen. And you see my screen here, I guess. And I have to maybe move there. I hope you see my screen. No. In the way I cannot see myself. Yes. Hope the technology is there and that you are seeing my screen. I am also the professor in digitalization or building information modeling at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and I'm sitting here in 3 screens. First of all, Joan Pocas Martins, thank you very much for your good introduction for the term digital twin that I will continue on, and also to Pedro Meda, who I worked together with in our joint project, Growing Circle. Yes, the title is Digital Twin in Social Housing. And as you see from the title, it's 2 aspects from it. I started to look into what is our thoughts and ideas about social housings. And see that there is some challenges also related to the development in the industry, that because the cost is rising. So there is high focus on the delivering good services to lowest possible price. And I do think that is a challenge that is not faced in other segments of housing. That's high requirements because you want to have a good living, but you should do it at an affordable price. And there is some challenges to do. And also foresee that there is a challenge to have the capacity and to align big families with the right type of flat. When I'm looking into the title that I have for this conference, we see also that there is focus on circular economy and also in sustainability as part of it. And I do think that this is really facing the challenges and also the dynamics that we have, that something is going to happen in our way of looking at social housing and how we are managing that. Because in circular economy, I'm not going into detail, but one principle is that you don't have waste, and you also foresee focus on total cost of ownership, because you are in a circle, it's not going away, so you have to deal with it. And also a part of it is also sustainability with a triple bottom line, and that means that in sustainability, in addition to economics, we do also have the societal part of it. It's not, and also of course the environmental part. So that is important to see that I have tried to bring in some new ideas in this discussion. I'm not having a very clear conclusion, but one of my ideas is to bring in this digital twin concept, and it's in a way a bit blurry concept used in a lot of industries in different ways. But the key element, as Martinez was very clear on, is that you need a lot of data. So digital twin is defined as a virtual representation of a physical assets as a flat enabled through data. And you have simulators for real-time prediction, optimization, monitoring, control, and improved decision-making. That is important. You have those sources there representing it. On the other hand, it also how to deal with social housing, where you also have the situation that it's often foresee managed by a state or a municipality, and also foresee for non-profit. But it also had the focus on providing affordable housing, and that is a challenge to combine this. But what is missing when I normally look into social housing and digital twin is actually foresee the right combination of people at the right places. That is a paradox in a way. I will go further into that, because one thing is the physical built environment and the digital, but you also have to include a lot of information about the people. And I see it very much where you work in an engineering world. And as this figure below says, with this focus on building, yes, you have 3D models, data, and so on, and you have it represented as the as-built. This enables, of course, to look into the digital twin concept, where you can have much information about the building. You can do analytics, and you have a knowledge base, and also you see terms like machine learning enabling it. But what we normally have too much focus on is actually the physical thing. But the important thing in social housing is of course the people and the combination of people living there. And I'm bringing it as the digital twin to bridge the physical and digital, but in the physical, it's also including the people and the combination of peoples. And you need to know more than just that they want some area to live on. People is also a resource, so you know to know their needs, preferences, and resources, because in this way of circular economy, as a people is of course a resource where we focus on built living environment and well-being as part of it. So I do think this mindset, enabled through data but also wisely managed, is very important in succeeding in social housing. That means that yes, we have now good systems. We have the BIM models, we have standard for product data, and also for the need for maintenance and all those things, yes, which we didn't have some years ago. We do also have some information about the persons, but they are normally, and from my experiences, in another department in the municipality or other ways. And it's very limited information that you have about them and the combination. So it's more to foresee place that foresee type of person, as you see here with this black and white figure, a family of 4 men and women and 2 children, and you don't have to know about the sex of the children. Okay, 4 persons into a flat. But they are living together with other people. And to understand this, to create this living built environment, you need to focus on data integration. And smart cities and digital twin is a concept to enable this type of solution. So that is my intention by this presentation, to look into what you can do when integrating data and also including person and product. I'm not going into detail, but this also has an impact on achieving the sustainability goals. I'm not reading all this text, but it is to focus on data, to collect data security, manage it, and also to bringing together different strategies. Also, thinking about the neighborhood, digitalization and renovation, so we know very much about the built environment, but also that people in some situation can also contribute to renovation, doing something or making to a good element. And also this combination. And you see from the sustainability goals in below that there is a large number of goals that we are reaching by having this focus on data integration. It's not only about what we see in construction industry and use of digitalization as a number 9 about innovation, but also see that this is far more wide. And this enabling these things is more about a shift of mentality. And you see from this figure that there is one term that I will repeat as a going from hosting to homing, as a way of living together with other people in the right circle. That means that you have to switch from single services, yes, family there, and foresee some number of rooms, and you have done your job, to foresee also not only look at the client, yes, sorry, you need to have support for your living, but also to create a community. Not only to say that, yes, we have to do it at almost lowest cost for the building itself, because if you are creating a not that good living environment, the social cost, the societal cost will be very high. And there it comes with optimization and thinking not on cost, but on investment. And then I also have a term that I am thinking about. Yes, physical properties. We have good control of that. And as engineers, as I am, we do that very well and control. But also the personal performance, making people living to it going. We, of course, have a systems and regulation and avoid the mistakes and follow the rules. But I do think that we are maybe challenging the way we are organizing social housing. So learning continuously is a way. And there, to enable this, we have to switch from single data decision to more integrated analysis, where digital twin is this enabler for analysis and decision making for increased well-being. And as part of this, and also where advanced or more dedicated information analysis, or even also support of machine learning, to take some of the terms, going into the root cause and also managing controllable factors. See what can the municipality do something about. And to enable this, I do think that the digital twin concept as part of digitalization is very, very important to have in mind. So this is my last slide in this presentation. And as you see, the title is a bit changed from digital twin for social homing. And this is the challenge I want to bring into this discussion, to have a wider scope, but to have it supported by digital solution. So thank you for your attention. And I guess, yes.
Muito obrigado, 𝐬𝐬, pela intervenção.
Thank you, dear 𝐬𝐬, for your presentation. And within this subject, we will now have 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬, leader of the Social Green with a training in land planning and urban geography with research in the field of urban geography, but also governance and policies that have to do with spatial planning and development. Johannes, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now try to share my screen. Okay. Can you see my presentation now? Let me know if you can't. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conference. My name is Johannes Lidmo, and I work at 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬 as a research fellow. And 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬 has the past years been the lead partner of the Interreg Europe Social Green Project. And I'm here to talk about what we have done in the Social Green Project and some lessons learned, and also some paths forward we foresee as important to future explore. So I will change the slide.
Johan,
yes?
No, we are not seeing your screen share.
This is weird. And now I think you can. I couldn't see the window. Can you see it now?
No, not yet. Okay, I think it's okay. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All these technicalities. Sorry for that. So in the Social Green Project, we consisted of 8 partners across Europe, and in which 6 of our partner regions were partners who actually were working on improving regional policies for greening the social housing sector. That actually meant that in our project, we both focus on retrofitting projects that have a positive impact on both the energy performance of the buildings, but also the well-being of the people living in them. And I think that was also clear in the previous presentation, that we shouldn't forget about the people living in the housing stock. So I really like the homing term that was used by the previous speaker. So next slide here. In the Social Green Project, because it's an Interreg Europe project, it follows some kind of a logic that we have basically 3 different kinds of elements. It consists of inter-regional learning, producing some action plans and implementing the action plans with the aim to improve the RP implementations in the partner regions. When it comes to the interregional learning, which was very important in the project, it consisted of identifying good practices across the partner regions, going on study visits to inspire one another, have project meetings, discussing the challenges and the solutions for retrofitting the social housing stock, and also attending various conferences. But maybe more importantly, I would like to say was that all the partner regions established local stakeholder groups, and some of them have continued after the project, because the project was basically finalized a few months ago. And in those local stakeholder groups, consisting of the actors in the partner regions, they could discuss, identify challenges, and also find solutions and share it across the partners in the project, which has been very successful in actually finding good solutions, both for policy improvement, but also maybe to find measures that is needed to retrofit the housing stock for social housing. One question maybe that we should discuss here, or I would like to say, is why should we focus on social housing? And there are probably many reasons for why we should focus on social housing, and that is because it presents a particular difficult and maybe sensitive target for retrofitting for many reasons. It could be that especially the tenants in the social housing stock can also be in extra risk for energy poverty. It could also be that some tenants, especially in some of our partner regions, the tenants there, they lack trust in municipalities or public actors. It's important to actually build that trust. And there is always an overwhelming risk for eco-gentrification when actually retrofitting the social housing stock, if that would lead to increased rent. So there are many factors to consider when retrofitting the social housing stock. So we need to keep the long-term affordability in mind, placing both health, economic needs of the social tenants at the forefront when applying strategies. In the previous presentation, we also discussed what we meant by social housing, and in our project, it became quite clear that it differs quite a lot across Europe. And I think many of us here today are aware that we have probably different understandings of what we mean by social housing. But what is very clear is perhaps that it is focusing on serves the needs of low-income and vulnerable residents. But the ownership of social housing varies. Croatia, for instance, didn't have a definition of social housing when we started the project, and there are many privately owned rental housing or different forms of housing corporates that also operate or serves the needs for low-income and vulnerable residents. And I think that is important to keep in mind when we talk about social housing in a European context, that it differs quite a lot, and especially when we want to develop policies that are targeting housing for vulnerable groups. Another related concept that we also dealt with in the project and that also have received more attention in Europe in recent years especially is the concept of energy poverty. And that is important to emphasize here because it occurs basically when a household is unable to secure a level of quality of domestic energy services which is sufficient for its social and material needs. So it's placed in a specific context where you live. And it's important that you should be able to afford your energy services. And that is a huge challenge across Europe and something that the European level is working on, and something that we in the Social Green Project started to address within the project, because by improving the policies for green retrofits of the social housing stock, we also, through our implementation of the action plans, made it better for that situation. And I just want to emphasize that it's important also to talk about energy poverty as a concept also in the social housing stock, particularly. In the Social Green Project, there were, of course, many challenges that we worked with that were addressed and identified in the project. I will not go through all of them listed here, but what is common maybe to all of them, it comes back to accessing financial resources to fund retrofitting projects that is adapted or are targeting vulnerable groups in the social housing sector, because that was a challenge, how to find the right ways there. And there are many dimensions to this, and one is a territorial dimension. And if you look at the last bullet points, lack of focus on rural and sparsely populated regions, we had a quite excellent example from Estonia, where before the project had a policy instrument called 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜, which is a well-developed grant and loan scheme, which is a very good example. It is granting more than hundreds of buildings per year for retrofit, but the majority of those retrofitting projects were located in Tallinn and Tartu, the two largest cities, which really means that territory matters also for this policy instrument, and some troubled rural development situations became even worse. So what they have done in the project, our Estonian partners, was to actually adapt and change the policy instrument of the credit schemes to also target different territorial areas, which was a very important solutions in their specific region. And I just want to say that there are many dimensions to financing side, but territory is one important aspect to consider here, especially if you want to find solutions for all in Europe. Just to sum up, because I know we're running out of time, some lessons learned from the project is, of course, that it's very important with these long-term collaborative approaches that we could see in our project. When the local stakeholder groups were established, where the most relevant actors could start discussing, identifying challenges, and actually find solutions and change policy instruments to be much more targeted or adapted, then we could actually see the solutions being implemented. Another thing I want to also emphasize is that in some countries, especially in Romanian parties in the project, they had difficulties with with trust with the social tenants, and it was very important to work with that in order to actually approve some measures needed to retrofit the buildings. And that is, I guess, a challenge that can exist in other countries in Europe as well. But it's important that we don't forget those living in the apartments, those living in the houses of social housing when we are developing policies, that this needs to be taken into consideration. I want to end this presentation by maybe emphasizing where we see the future needs, because it has been a lot of emphasizing on financial models. And what we could see in the project for maybe some policy innovation in the future is within the financial policy schemes that exist out there, because they are very important when we want to actually carry out a retrofitting projects in the social housing sector. And one is blended financial instrument, where you combine public financing with private financing, because both exist out there in different forms. But what we could see in the project was the difficulties in combining several types of sources of financing into the same retrofitting projects from the public side and from the private side. So we think maybe a way forward that can be explored further is this kind of blended financial investment schemes, and that can maybe help accelerating the renovation wave that now needs to take place, because housing is emitting a lot is having a lot of energy consumption in Europe as a whole, but we also need to target energy poverty in general. And we think maybe these kind of financial investment schemes, blended ones, can be one path forward of many. And I want to stop there because I know we're running out of time. So thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Johannes.
Muito obrigado, Johannes, for talking about energy poverty and the challenges within this scope on terms of public housing throughout Europe. We will close this with Dara Turnbull, coordinator of Housing Europe, works with the Housing Europe Observatory and with many other initiatives funded by the EU, including the project Houseful, to increase the adhesion to the circular construction practices and renewal in Europe. Dara, I don't know if you're there.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully you will be able to see it up. So, can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You see it now? Okay, perfect. So yes, indeed, I know that I'm the last speaker of the day, and that I'm standing between all of you and getting to eat your lunch. So I'll try to be as quick as I can. So indeed, I'm going to run through quickly some of the challenges and the opportunities which exist in terms of upscaling and implementing circular renovation and building practices, particularly in the social housing sector. So when we look at some of the challenges which exist, one of the main issues is that circular housing renovations and development remain quite a niche topic in Europe today. We are seeing increasing numbers of projects which are implementing circular principles, but it does remain quite a niche. One of the issues around that is that there are relatively few experts and relatively few practitioners when it comes to designing, implementing, and managing circular solutions. And that means that, for example, we don't really have any economies of scale that we can rely upon. This is an interesting quote from a recent analysis that I came across of the use of circular building practices, which said that in the last couple of years, actors in the construction industry have shown an increasing willingness to move towards circular businesses. However, many consider circular construction to be a more expensive option, which makes actors reluctant to invest in circularity. And that really is kind of a key issue that we find when we talk to people who are looking to implement circular solutions, that actually they might have limited budgets, and therefore being circular, while it is the desirable outcome for social housing providers or a cooperative or whoever it is, it does cost more upfront, and that is something which is difficult to deal with. And that kind of comes down to another issue, which is what we call cognitive biases. So basically, people who we all as humans make errors of judgment based on these inbuilt biases that we had. So for example, we really put a lot of priority on our immediate circumstances and discount the impact that what we do today will have on our impact on our well-being tomorrow. So a good example of that is global warming. We put more of an emphasis on maintaining our economic stability and quality of life, and we discount the fact that that actually will denigrate our quality of life going forward. So what we need to do is move away from, and as the speakers already said, move away from the linear model of kind of produce, use, and then throw away, and move to a more life cycle approach. And this is particularly evident when we look at a building. You know, for example, my phone here, maybe I'll use it for 2 or 3 years. Hopefully, when I get rid of it, some components in it can be recycled and be reused in phones in the future. But realistically, a lot of the raw materials will end up in a landfill somewhere. But a building isn't quite the same. It isn't a consumer good. It doesn't really have a kind of a taste element. That means that it needs to be constantly changed and upgraded and so on. You know, a good quality building will last you anywhere from 80 to 100 years, and even some modern buildings probably can last you even above 100 years. So it's very, very short-sighted of us to look at an investment in social housing as being, how much does it cost us in year 1? We need to look at how much does it cost us in year 20, how much does it cost us in year 50, or even in year 100 when we have to disassemble the building or demolish the building. So we need to move from the linear, immediate to the long-term perspective on the cost of a building. Before I bring in a practical example of how that actually works, I'd just like to give quickly the perspective of the social housing sector. So what we really believe is the circular economy principles applied to housing can be a driver of local resilience. And there are many ways in which that takes place. And I won't go through all of them because some of them have been mentioned already, and I know that we're short on time, but I mean, you know, circular economy can drive, for example, behavioral changes within residents. It can encourage people to take up nature-based solutions. So, for example, using wood rather than using concrete, for example. And it also can focus on a human-centered approach, which is a key element of social and cooperative housing, is the relationship that we have with residents, the relationship that we have with tenants and the housing providers. And one really, really good example of that we see comes from the UK, which is the Clarion Housing Group. So Clarion Housing, for those of you who aren't familiar, is one of the largest providers of social housing in England. And they are really taking the principle of circular economy forward, even going as far as developing a circular economy strategy, which they are now rolling out in their developments. So what they're really trying to do is to see their developments not as in the typical way of, okay, we need the raw materials, we need concrete, we need steel, etc., but they're actually trying to view their buildings as being a collection of reusable components. So they're really, really taking on board the view of circular housing that we need to think of housing almost being like Lego, the toy that you played with as a child. You fit the bricks together, but if you don't like the bricks or the bricks need to be changed, you can just literally take them off and replace them with something different. And nothing is wasted. You can reuse those bricks in a different building, for example. So that's really the model that Clarion is moving forward towards, which is away from raw materials and more towards elements which can be adapted, reused, and recycled in future developments or replaced as they become obsolete. So that's a really important element that we're hoping will be used in other countries by other social housing providers going forward. So to give you kind of a very practical example of circular social housing, this is the 𝐃𝐲𝐬 project, which is from Sweden, which is a public housing project. So this is kind of an overview of one of the housing units within the project. You can see there's a huge variety of different circular elements, from solar panels to grey and black water recycling, to even hydrogen generation on site, and to the harvesting of rainwater. And this is all being done with the ambition of producing public housing, which is affordable for the tenants, of course, but which is also completely self-sustaining and off-grid. And what's really interesting about the 𝐃𝐲𝐬 project is that they're actually building 2 basically identical buildings next to each other, 44 apartments which will be traditional on-grid apartments, and then 44 apartments which would be, as I've just shown, off-grid, producing their own electricity, recycling all their own waste. And what that allows us to do is that over the life cycle of these two buildings, we'll be able to very clearly compare and contrast the costs over the life cycle of these buildings in terms of maintenance and upkeep and costs of electricity and waste management and so on. And indeed, we do have some really interesting figures from this project which show the importance of looking at the life cycle and not just at the upfront cost of development. So what we see is that the 44 traditional on-grid apartments, which will get their electricity and waste management from the usual supply, will cost 13 million euro to develop upfront, whereas the 14 circular off-grid apartments will cost 17 million. So there's about a 90,000 euro difference in the cost between the on-grid and off-grid circular buildings. And what we see is, though, over the life cycle of the building, in year 10, the circular building will maintain a cost disadvantage of about €500,000. By year 20, that has more or less equalized. And actually, by year 30, the cumulative cost of the circular building will actually have a €1.5 million advantage versus the on-grid traditional model. And then by year 50, that will jump to a €13.5 million cost saving advantage. So actually, over the life cycle of the building, you're looking at tens of millions of euros of saving in costs versus the traditional way of doing things. And that's based on, predicted inflation, predicted capital costs, but also the fact that in Sweden, at least, producing waste and using water will become more and more expensive as they move towards a more sustainable position. Therefore, the cost of dealing with waste in the traditional way will become economically unsustainable. So to conclude, I'd just like to look very quickly at some funding opportunities which could be looked at by social housing providers or regional or national governments in order to help to upscale and to encourage the development of circular building. So we have, for example, InvestEU, which will help to reduce the risk for private investors by essentially ensuring part of the riskier tranches of private investment, and that will help to leverage a huge amount of private investment into development of hopefully sustainable public and social housing. There's also ESF Plus, which can be used for training opportunities, particularly around developing green jobs and employment. We have the Just Transition Mechanism, which again has a lot of focus on supporting new green jobs, particularly in regions which would be affected by the transition from traditional economies, shall we say, carbon-intensive economies towards new, cleaner economies. We also have REACT-EU, which will focus on the transition towards a digital and green economy. And indeed, we heard earlier about BIM and about how we can use technology to drive investment and innovation in the circular economy and the green economy. So REACT-EU in that regard would be very important. And we also have the LIFE program, which will co-finance pilot and demonstration sites with a particular focus on financing circular economy demonstration sites. So again, that could be very interesting for social housing providers. And then one final thing I should mention is that Housing Europe is currently one of the partners on the Houseful project. So the Houseful project, basically, we are taking a very holistic approach to waste management, to the use of water, to the use of energy production, and indeed the use of materials within the renovation of a number of buildings within in Austria and in Spain, with the objective of basically setting a new standard for circular renovation and circular development of social housing that we hope will be taken up by other providers in the years to come. So there, I hope I kept the time. I hope that it was reasonably informative. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me or my colleagues at Housing Europe. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Dara, pelo excelente contributo.
Thank you, Dara, for your brilliant contribution with the quality of Housing Europe. Brilliant. We are coming to an end. Thank you to all the speakers who, throughout this morning, brought very pivotal subjects. It's now time for the closing of the Congress. I would like to call Paula Marques. She's the Councilwoman of Development of the City Council of Lisbon, but she's here as the President of the Portuguese Association of Municipal Housing. Paula Marques, you have the floor.
Olá, bom dia.
Hi, good morning. First, let me thank you for this challenge of debating during a whole morning the issues of the housing policy, of the right to housing, but focus on this issue, on dynamics and challenges. Let me thank also 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜. Let me congratulate Gebalis and 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜 for this initiative of putting together this meeting, and also being represented by 𝐃𝐲𝐬. Let me greet everyone at 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜, people who make up the organization, their workers, and also Helena Correia, of course. Let me greet workers of Gebalis. And let me tell you that, in my opinion, as a councilwoman of local development of the city of Lisbon, but also as a representative of the Portuguese Association and Municipal Housing, 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜 is part of the social parties of this association. It is crucial for us to work in partnership, this productive debate with a network of partnerships, of partners, municipal companies, municipalities, associations of the non-profit private sector, of the tertiary sector, to work to answer to territories, to cities, to villages that are socially fair, so with a social fabric that's non-polarized. There is one thing with a healthy society, there is one thing that remains clear. Public housing and public houses have to be seen as a tool of building democratically the territories where we live. And we cannot work, although we have to answer emergencies, and this is quite a challenging period to the firefighting of our everyday life. We need to build housing policies for the medium and long term. That's the only way we can have a robust structure that allows us to have an ability to answer in situations such as the one we are experiencing today. Let me greet the City Council of 𝐃𝐲𝐧𝐚𝐦𝐢𝐜 and the Faculty of Engineering of Porto and Housing Europe, of course. You have been doing a lot in gathering people and solving the difficulties brought by those who are part of Housing Europe, but with this concern. We have local policies, we have national policies, we have regional policies, and the importance of a structure such as Housing Europe and the participation of municipal companies, different countries, municipalities, of the cooperative sector, of the non-speculative product, of production of housing, of public initiative, congregated in a platform such as Housing Europe is pivotal so that we can bring to whom, from an European point of view, thinks and decides on public policies in the area of housing and building and the social and territorial cohesion. Our presence is fundamental in platforms such as Housing Europe, but what Housing Europe has been doing, and let's not be afraid of using the word lobby in the sense of getting our concerns across with an effective participation. For this closing session, I would leave this issue that for us as the Association of Municipal Housing that has been quite challenging, which is very important that those who have an intervention in the territory, those who have the first line of intervention, has a participation in designing public policies and designing tools so that we can answer to our difficulties and to what are public policies of housing brought forward by municipalities. So crossing local with national, with regional, with European, that is our desire. That is what we think is the future. Taking into consideration the idiosyncrasies of each territory, of each country, in issues of building, rehabilitation, but especially to have a platform that can aggregate these partnerships so that we can have a stronger, united voice in our claims and concerns. And a challenge. Think what cities and territories would we have in social terms living democratically in a fair, sane manner if we had cities, countries, territories, regions with 1/3 of housing, 100% public, 1/3 in the free market, and 1/3 of the private sector, non-speculative. What kind of territory would we have if we could build this 3/3 construction? Let me thank you again on behalf of the association for having us, and also to greet the presidency of the council for writing in their initiatives the right to housing. Thank you again. Thank you for being with us and for the value of the ideas that you shared. Now we have Luísa Salgueiro, the mayor of Matosinhos. Hello, good afternoon. I'm here, yes. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Let me start by greeting you all, especially the Secretary of State of Housing, Maria Gonçalves, Sorcha Edwards, Paula Marques, also special greeting. My colleague from 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬, 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬. Let me tell you what a pleasure it is for Matosinhos, and as the mayor and also as member of the board to be part of this moment. Well, many reasons. It's a pivotal subject in the present and future of our communities that the Portuguese presidency has selected as one of the subjects to address. And I'm very pleased seeing that social inclusion that we cannot but highlight it, the right of education, housing for all. And allow me, because Matosinhos has been very recently become part of Housing Europe, something that we are very honored. We are the institution in the north that belongs to this association of the north of Portugal that honors us. But our integration in Housing Europe comes from a long work of decades where Matosinhos has paid special attention to the subject of housing, and with which built 51 housing sets with 4,321 units, where we have 11,000 people, so clearly above the average in Portugal. Our public policy allows us to get a stock of municipal housing of around 5% pertaining to the total of units. So Matosinhos is within the average of the EU, taking upon a weight above the average of our country. When we built these housing sets, we were concerned with getting services of proximity, namely creating in locations kindergartens, day centers, retirement homes. This contributed for an integration, economic, social, of those vulnerable populations. We also had a decisive presence of the cooperative sector, with a housing market that was born from protocols with the autarky that granted this plot for a middle class that was preventive to access credit or the real estate market. One of the measure with the support of housing policies was supported rent program that allows us to support this in their own rents. So people are still residing where they choose and they get a monthly allowance by the council to pay part of the rent according to their income, supporting more than 2,200 families in the municipality of Matosinhos. Recently, answering the designs and challenges brought forward by the government, we have planned our local strategy of housing that is, without a question, what is mobilizing us. Of course, that municipal intervention has allowed until the middle of the last decade to mitigate and solve the market fails and gaps in the housing market, but recently many factors have contributed for the progressive increase of the value of rents and the price of buying houses, which brings new problems to the access to housing. Matosinhos has the second highest price in the metropolitan area of Porto, right next to Porto, and this makes it that the middle class and youngsters have no way of accessing a house in the territory of the municipality. Therefore, it's very important to draft a new generation of housing policies, not excluding the answer to the precariousness of housing, but also to solve the access of housing to youngsters and the middle class. Our diagnosis of habitational needs, defining the action priorities in our local strategy of housing, and within those priorities we'd like to highlight the increase of the habitational park in terms of municipality and also supported rents. We have available in the local strategy 57 million euros for the first challenges presented. In terms of the ongoing measures is the Primeiro Direito, which is a program to give back decent housing to the owners that are in a frail situation, allowing for the first time in public policies of housing in Portugal that the homeowners themselves can benefit from public funding. One other important measure that the autarkies will have to take on is a new opportunity for homeowners and tenants, which is accessible rent for audiences without able to answer in the current habitational framework or housing framework. Matosinhos has the goal of 500 units for accessible rent, affordable rent. The first programs were launched with the intention of benefiting from the risk that there was in some types of market answers, such as is the example as local accommodation. The market did not answer, it was quite reduced, the number of offers that we got for renting, so we are moving forward into a different model where we intend to build or free up these 500 housing units based on partnerships with private units, because they have published a regulation that defines the value of monthly rents according to location and typology. So the city will conclude renting agreements up to 25 years, and those homeowners will be available for us to sublet the apartments or the units so that the families can come to those houses according to a value that they will pay depending on their monthly income. So affordable rent based on this type of partnerships is one of the measures that we have to quickly answer this program of affordable rent. On the other hand, the solution of shared houses to answer to a population that is more and more dependent, aging population where people can hardly live alone, and sharing the house itself is a proper answer on the social level, is one of the choices that we are developing locally. This local strategy for housing is being complemented with other policies with the goal of making the market more lively and with help for families. This is because the housing stock in the municipality is still quite above the number of families, and as a paradox, there are families that have no access to housing. So we are using the municipal fiscal instruments, surveying empty units in the municipality, making sure or confirming that this is a situation, and we will penalize people who have houses that are empty, that are not occupying them, and unlike what has happening with most homeowners that have been benefited with the reduction of the municipal tax on property, their tax will go up so that we can get a balance between supply and demand in terms of housing. With the Recovery and Resilience Plan that was approved last week, that the country can have the necessary funding for the goal that was defined to celebrate the 50 years of democracy by solving the problems of precariousness in terms of housing, we will be able to fund these programs with affordable houses, coordination with İRU, temporary housing, alongside a policy that depends on local authorities of selecting areas of the territory as areas of urban rehabilitation that will benefit, on the one hand, benefits in terms of VAT, on the tax on transactions, but also bank credit in an extraordinarily favorable situation so that they can bring life to cities, making that central areas of our communities that are now in a situation of almost abandonment can be reoccupied, can get youngsters that need houses. So I do believe that Matosinhos and the rest of the country, we are in a unique moment of our history where we have resources that are absolutely amazing from the point of view of strategy that was defined by the government, and also the volume of investment that it's granted to us, 57 million euros in Matosinhos. So we do have resources, so the local authorities need to show the ability to allocate them the best way possible. So the way to reach our goals is to use the array of solutions that the government is providing, and the EU, of course, in order to identify the different needs that the population entails. It's not just the most vulnerable population socially excluded. No, there are many types of needs that our population shows, and I'm sure that if we do it in a way that's effective, we will be able not just solve the problem of the decade of 2030, but also a true reform in terms of housing that was never heard about before. And also this vision by the government and the ministry will not be possible, and as the mayor of a municipality which is the 8th greater in the country, we will do everything we can to celebrate properly and the most inclusive way manner the 50 years of our revolution that had its own characteristics. And I do hope that by sharing with Housing Europe that Matosinhos is now part of, we can not just be able to use national resources that are granted to us, but also to have a broader vision, allowing us to benefit from magnificent experiences with other members of the association. And I do hope that this is something that comes from the presidency of the council, which is amazing and that we could not imagine. But I do hope that in the future, when we look at 2021, we can say that it was an amazing year. Everything happened and positive things in terms of housing policies. From on the side of the municipality, let me greet you all that are associated with this initiative, and also to our Secretary of State, Marina Gonçalves. She has on her shoulders the responsibility, the political responsibility of managing all these files, and also to the partners of Housing Europe. Good work, and I hope to meet you for the first time as a member of the association, and I hope in person, although it is a pleasure to be here online. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and also the positive remarks. And now we have the Secretary of State for Housing, Marina Gonçalves. Good morning. Let me greet the Mayor of Matosinhos, Luísa Salgueiro, also the Councilwoman here by the quality of the President of the Association of Municipal Housing, 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬, board member of 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐜, and he was promoter of this debate that we had, Pedro Pinto, also President of the Board of Gebalis, who also helped to bring this model forward and has been helping us to work with housing policies. Also Sorcha Edwards, Secretary General of Housing Europe, an entity that we have been working a lot in terms of housing policies, and it's very useful so that you can think if these are tools that in the field will give an answer to all the needs, so that together we can accelerate and make it more effective. Our tools, let me greet everything that we have been doing together in an articulated manner. This morning is a good omen for housing policies. Although it's a fundamental right, it's a pillar of social rights, it is also part of the Constitution, but it always came second. Unlike education, unlike health, unlike social security, where there is an active answer by the state in terms of housing, if there was a need to answer to needs, that would be important, but focused on eliminating slums, bank credit, but we never had a cross-sectional policy of promoting housing policies that protect the access to a right that is an universal right, a fundamental right that must gather us all. And we failed to do it for too much time. So municipalities had their programs, 𝐸RU also, but without this cross-sectional policy, without this active role by the state, without this funding of public policy, it was never possible to give a proper answer. And now we are a bit late. We are trying to recover. The status of what we found in the field is clear. We have a housing problem that does not just encompass families that are in situation of fragility, but also the middle class who cannot find an answer because of the lack of adjustment between their income and the rents of the market. And the answer for these two main problems has to do with strengthening the active housing that exists with a direct investment by the state. That's the only way to give answer to these families. And since the beginning of the previous legislature that started to do the new generation of housing policies is nothing more than identifying needs, identifying goals, and identifying, of course, the tools, legal tools, but also financial tools necessary so that we can build this public housing policy. The RP is very important also in defining this status. The pandemic came to strengthen the need to have a strong policy, but also brought us this opportunity, this funding tool that will allow us to focus and give priority affordable rent or primeiro direito as tools for housing policy, public housing policy. With the strengthening and increasing the number of houses, we will not just give an answer to families, but we will be able to regulate the market. It's very important so that we can take learnings from the past of the inexistence of a cross-sectional policy to be our model to build a policy into the future that's stable, that's long-lasting, that doesn't stop in the present, but it takes into account not just overcoming what is the delay of the past, but also this policy of continuity, that evolution of needs, that there is a public answer built or being built. This is very important, so it's not just a tool for planning up to 2026, such as RRP, but a tool to be in the field, stable, public policy, that the number of houses is increased so that people give their right to housing protected with housing policies. Our two big tools, and the mayor mentioned one of them, which is very important, which is called Primeiro Direito, is for people that have greater difficulties, lower income, and also the affordable rent, not within the logic of incentive to the private market, but also a program set on a pool of houses belonging to the state in terms of affordable rent, taking on the heritage of the state that is empty, rehabilitating it, putting it to serve the people. In Primeiro Direito, there is a direct articulation of municipalities that identify the real needs of the field, that identify the promoters that might not just be the municipality, but also those that have to do with housing solutions, that identify private homeowners that although they have their houses, they don't have the conditions to make it decent. The Primeiro Direito aims to have the survey of needs on the municipalities and then the funding that fortunately with the RRP will allow us to fund 100%, at least 26,000 housing solutions. This is one of the great priorities, one of the great action lines that once again, as I was saying, should not stop in RRP, but making sure that everyone has access to decent housing. We have an ambitious goal defined for April 2024, which is to make sure that 26,000 families have decent solutions in terms of housing, but the survey that we are doing with the municipalities, the needs go beyond this. That's why it is so important that we continue this policy beyond 2024 and beyond the RRP, so that we can say that all of those who have needs for public housing, all of those who have an intervention in their heritage, in their real estate, can access the Primeiro Direito program, people who are identified, and to fulfill throughout this partnership, this articulation that is so important between 𝐬𝐬, the government, and municipalities. But also in affordable renting, although there is an active participation by 𝐬𝐬, the municipalities have a fundamental role, not just in identifying needs, but also in promoting these partnerships to make sure that there are solutions in terms of housing. And the challenge of today, coming from the city of Matosinhos, we have been working a lot with the municipality of Matosinhos, with example, with our partnership and articulation between what the municipality has and what 𝐬𝐬 and the ministry and the government has to provide to promote the affordable renting. And in partnership, we will create housing solutions for middle class, for the youngsters that cannot become independent. That's the only way to improve the public houses, and we can regulate the market. Just one thing about the importance of a third public policy tool, that it's here to give continuity to this answer, to this design, to this fundamental right. Primeiro Direito and affordable renting are two programs focused on what is answering the needs for housing, permanent, stable. But we are facing, and the pandemic came to accentuate this reality. We are cities of emergency in terms of housing, urgent needs in terms of housing, that although temporary, they must be decent and stable from the point of view of the social answer. And there is a clear gap in terms of our answers nationally. And it's very important to get this effort between government government e do municipalities. And this effort to give a housing solution, an answer that allows to identify an emergency need and the housing solutions in the field so that no one is prevented of getting a house. Of course, that this will have to do with public policies or the private market, depending on what we are talking about. But analyzing the future, the past, and the present, we must learn with was not done in the past. This public responsibility for promoting housing policies so that we can look into the future with the goal of understanding how necessary it is to fulfill this new generation of housing policies, this design of an active role, and that together with these entities that were here today sharing their views on housing policies so that we can make them a reality in the field. No one must be without this fundamental right. It's not just a place where we live, it's a place where we work, it's a place where a lot of our youngsters study, it's a place where we protect our public health. If there were any questions of how important it is to make sure that this housing policy is necessary, the pandemic came to show that we should have started a long time ago. But fortunately, we have this will and we have this momentum. We will hit the ground running. So while we have people who need answers, people who need houses, we need to work, we need to fund, we need to create tools. That's our duty as public entities, making sure that everyone has access to decent housing. Hence the importance of the role of the state and its different roles in terms of housing proposals, so we cannot make the mistakes of the past, waiting the market to solve for itself. No, it's important to have a perspective from the private market, but we must strengthen this public answer so that we can create a set of houses that belong to the state that are strong for situations that cannot be fitted into the private market. So the state as promoter of public policies for housing. Let me finish by thanking you again for this sharing of best practices, of solutions looking into the future. I'm sure that we will continue to work together, not just on a national point of view, but also international, promoting housing policies. It's very important because this is where we can understand if the public policies in our designs are compatible with the real needs of the population, and to understand how we all together, each one in its role, can contribute for this right to housing. Let's unite to make sure that housing is not just a fundamental right, it is a priority for the government, for the country, and also for the EU. Only then, with all this agreement that I hope will continue, can we build a housing policy that's solid. Congratulations again, very important, all this sharing, and I'm absolutely sure that we will meet again in different occasions to foster and promote public policy. Thank you, dear Secretary of State, for this invaluable presentation and also for the greetings. And we came to an end. So many participants. We do hope that this food for thought that was shared here have been clear enough and inspiring enough. On behalf of the organizing committee, Matosinhos Avit, Gebalis, cities of Matosinhos and Lisbon, Housing Europe, and the Construction Institute, the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto, a special greeting to all the speakers and to all of those who were with us throughout this morning. And of course, thank you to the technical team who made this event possible. Thank you and see you soon.
ARA, the Housing, Finance and Development Centre of Finland, has a major responsibility for the implementation of Finnish housing policy. ARA provides government grants, subsidies and guarantees related to housing and construction of housing. Together with the City of Helsinki, we welcome you to the International Social Housing Festival 2022 in Helsinki. At the festival, we explore the role of social, public and cooperative housing in achieving socially and ecologically sustainable living. The festival themes are 1. People first, quality of housing as quality of living. 2. Achieving affordability and sustainability in housing. And 3. The right to housing, getting rid of the excuses not to guarantee it.
Se perhe, joka asuu siinä kodissa ja sitten myöskin se naapurusto, ne ihmiset, jotka asuu siinä ympärillä, siinä yhteisössä, se tekee sen kodin.
We see the quality of housing as a fundamental prerequisite for a good quality of living. In Finland, public, cooperative and social housing providers have been committed to this mission for decades. A pleasant home and a safe living environment are the cornerstones of our physical, mental and social well-being.
Mulle kodissa on tärkeintä se, että se näyttää omalta ja että siellä on kiva sellainen sisustus, mikä on meidän näköinen. Ja sitten tietenkin se perhe on ykkösjuttu, että siellä on ne rakkaat ihmiset ja koirat.
Transition towards ecologically sustainable living is a major challenge globally. At the ISHF 2022, we will explore how this can be achieved without leaving anyone behind. We want to showcase and learn from each other about various ways of financing affordable housing and innovate new solutions to construction and renovation in a sustainable way. For instance, Helsinki City Housing Company, the largest lessor in Finland, has created an application, 𝐂𝐸xpertti, that encourages resident participation in creating sustainable living environments. The application makes it easy for residents to take action and reduce the carbon footprint of their household and the housing community as a whole.
Helsingin asuntopolitiikka tehdään kaikille ja Helsingin asuntopolitiikka haluaa palvella monipuolisesti myös täällä jo asuvia ihmisiä. Tällä hetkellä me rakennetaan Helsingissä useita isoja uusia asuinalueita ja näitä kaikkia uusia alueita me rakennetaan sellaisilla periaatteilla, että sinne tulee niin kovan rahan omistusasuntoja kuin sitten säädeltyä asumista ja kaupungin omaa sosiaalista asuntotuotantoa, säädeltyä vuokra-asuntotuotantoa.
The public sector has a crucial role providing the right to housing for everyone. Finland is a leading example in abolishing homelessness, but also in addressing the exclusion of the most vulnerable groups at the housing market, as well as promoting socially balanced neighborhoods.
Riippumatta siitä, että onko pienituloinen tai suurituloinen, niin me halutaan, että on mahdollista asua Helsingissä. Et kyllä se on semmoinen asia, mistä voi musta Helsingissä olla ylpeä ja jota mielellään myös sitten näytän tänne tuleville vieraille.
More than ever, we must come together to discuss how to solve the acute and the future housing challenges, and how to assist the birth of new solutions, also by promoting active citizenship and resident participation. For more information, visit socialhousingfestival.eu.